Welcome everybody. Time is 7 o'clock. I'm going to call the meeting to order. This is our regularly scheduled council meeting for September 11th. As we call this meeting to order, as we always do, we'd just like to acknowledge that we're gathering on traditional territories of the Coast and Straits Salish peoples, specifically the Lekwungen people, known today as the Songhees and the Esquimalt nations, and recognizing that their historic connections to these lands and adjoining waters continues to this day. Up first on the agenda, we have approval of the agenda. Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussion on the agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. We have adoption of minutes. We can move them all, and then if there's any changes, we can deal with them one by one.
I'll move adoption.
Thank you. This is one regular and 3 special council minutes. I moved as seconded. Thank you. Any discussion, changes, corrections, amendments? For councillors and for those who are watching and either in person or in line, we have Councillor Green and Councillor Appleton. Councillor Green had her family exposure to COVID, so she said abundance of caution, keeping us all safe by joining us from home. And Councillor Appleton is traveling for work and joining us remotely from the interior. So very appreciative of the two of you being with us today. But I don't see any hands popping up online or in here, so I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed. That carries. That covers our minutes. Mayor's remarks. They'll be brief. I would encourage people to go back last week and listen to my remarks. I made a fairly lengthy just talk about some of the strained issues around housing and expectations between the province and municipalities and the federal government, and how we might work together better in the future, but I'm not going to repeat that tonight. I would like to recognize and acknowledge there was a large number of cyclists that came down and rode from UVic here today, asking for improved cycling infrastructure, which we're all very supportive of. I know we have 3 considerable projects in the works right now, expected to be completed this year or the next 18 months or so. 2 east-west and 1 north-south, with more to come. So, but a lot of that, of course, is thanks to the ask and of people for safer cycling infrastructure, but also safer pedestrian infrastructure and other pieces. So just want to acknowledge that the organization of that and showing up here, we had an in-camera meeting when it arrived, so we had a limited chance to talk to the riders, but I'm sure they'll be back again on a regular basis. We'll have a chance to have further conversation. I'd also just want to turn our mind to a gentleman by the name of Ken Agate. Some of you may know him. He was the owner of the Blethering Place on Oak Bay Avenue from 1981 to 2011. Which is a real anchor of the community. He was one of the founders of Oak Bay Tourism in 1999 and started the Oak Bay Collector Car Show and ran that from 1999 until this year. So this year he handed it off to Ron Dempsey and Tony Joe as his health was failing, and he passed away sadly this morning. So after a long bout with illness, so we just want to honor him and his approximately 40 years of volunteering and service to the community. So he really contributed a lot. Aside from that, we have a large agenda with a lot of items to get through, and so I really appreciate everybody's attention to this. We're going to give all of them the attention that they deserve. I'm just asking, of course, that all members of council and staff and the public, if you have points to make, try and keep them as concise as you can as we talk about these items, because we have a lot of work to get through. That does not limit us in our ability to talk. Up next, we have our public comment and question period. So public comment and question is available for members of the public. We have a total of 30 minutes. Yeah, you can come forward. We'll start this process. You can talk to council about any items of interest outside of land use. So we have some limitations within our procedures bylaw that we can't talk about land use applications that are coming before council. But really anything else that's of interest to Oak Bay or the broader community, you're welcome to talk to us about. So you have up to 3 minutes. Our process here, I know Ms. Curry, but if you could just state your name and your municipality of residence, and then you have your 3 minutes.
Okay, hi, my name is Hazel Curry, and...
Oh, yes, please turn on the microphone.
Hi, my name is Hazel Curry, and first off, greetings to Mayor and Council, of course, as well. And I'm privileged to be a community volunteer and ambassador with an organization in Canada called MitoCanada. And also pleased to look around the room and recognize many people I volunteered in the community with, or have done projects in the community, or at Oak Bay High, volunteer there actively as well. But I wanted to show up today to put a face to a name and also to show appreciation. I know City Council did the proclamation for next week, and it's for World Mitochondrial Disease Week, which is next week, September 18th to 24th. And I just wanted to acknowledge how important that is for Canadians living with mito diseases. The particular next week, one part of it that excites me is September 23rd, which is a week Saturday. It's World Light Up Mito, so that's green, you light up green. And City Hall is graciously going to be lit up green next week and also on the 23rd, which is exciting. Last year for Mito Week, there were 332 monuments around the world that were lit up green. So far, just in Victoria alone, the BC legislature is going to be lit up, City Hall for Victoria, among others. Around Canada, Niagara Falls, the CN Tower, municipal councils in Newfoundland, New Brunswick, all the way across Canada are going to be lit up. Previous years, the Colosseum in Rome, Leeds Castle, there's a huge list, obviously. So I'm excited that Oak Bay will be lit up as well. Looking forward to going there, getting a few pictures on the 23rd, and maybe adding them to the world's social media site for the Mitochondrial Day. Just a quick, I wanted to give a 1-minute science Coles Notes, because most people have never heard of what mitochondrial disease is, unless you're in biology at university. So basically, mitochondria are present in every human body. They create more than 90% of our energy that makes our hearts beat, we're able to breathe, makes our brains function. And when they don't work properly, you're just not producing your energy that you need. So that's like a power plant that just is shutting down. So in Canada, there's about 1 in 4,000 people have a mito disease. I'm sure there's many others in Oak Bay. There's no cure and no effective treatments. And I also have a rare mitochondrial disease. And it's called, the acronym is MENGIE, M-N-G-I-E. And I'll explain what the word is because you'll understand why you need an acronym. It stands for mitochondrial neurogastrointestinal encephalomyopathy. And I'm probably right now the only Canadian alive with it. So I'm the first and only in BC history, and there's 200 people in the world with it. So as part of this is I'm trying to raise awareness, but also I'm trying to find other MENGIE people. So I run a website, and I found 9 in the world, which might not seem like a lot, but when there's 200 in the world, ultra rare. I found people in Italy and the UK. I've talked to people all around the world. So it's really exciting. So just to close, I wanted to thank Oak Bay Council and Mayor for lighting up green next week and for your proclamation. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Curry. Is there anyone else who wishes to talk to council at this time? There's a lot of people here. I'm assuming somebody wants to talk to us. Please come forward. Same thing, yeah, just name and municipality residence.
Yes, of course. Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Nancy Craig. I'm a resident of Oak Bay, and I just wanted to take this opportunity to voice my support of the rezoning and the development proposal.
So we can't do any land use for the public participation period. All land use items are coming, if this moves forward, will be coming. We have some correspondence, but we don't do it at part of the public participation period.
Okay, I was led to believe something else, so.
Yeah, no, my apologies. So, yeah, for those in the audience, pretty much most land use items within our local government have a public participation period, whether we allow for public comment. Our procedures here is really designed around, I was going to say this when we got to the items on the agenda, but largely around getting input from staff and then advisory bodies, and then it comes to council for a first look. And then we move that if it's deemed to have a value to have public input. Then there's a single public input portion where we ask all of the community to come out either in writing or in person to speak to the application. But we don't do it here. This is a one part of the meeting that we don't have public input on land use.
Okay,
Yes.
all right, thank you.
But you can write to us, absolutely.
Yes, I have written, and I believe that my correspondence was given to your package
It is, and
today.
so anything that
Yes.
came in earlier than this noon, I think, is part of our agenda package today.
Okay. Totally unrelated question, and I don't know if this is the appropriate
You're here, why
venue
not? Go for it.
I'm really interested in the resurfacing of the Oak Bay track, and I'm just wondering kind of where that is at this time, if that's
Sure,
possible.
I'm going to hand that off to Councillor Braithwaite, who is very generous with her time, helping with that fundraising.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, we're actually in the middle of doing the fundraising for that. We have a committee that gets together, and is currently going out to some big funders to hopefully get some funding for that track right now. But there's always, every month, there's a bottle drive that Rotary puts on to get money, and just look in the local newspaper or on the Oak Bay High website, and there'll be all of the different things that you can do to help to raise money to resurface the track.
Okay,
Thank you.
good. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So yeah, if there's, just to help everybody that's here, so we have a large audience for a night that we don't have much space for public participation. So you're welcome to stay and thing. Most of the items on the agenda tonight are for, fall into the category of a first look. And then generally speaking, we do a sort of a cursory review, and then we would send it out to the public for comment for most of the items on the agenda. So there'd be actually, and at the next meeting comes public input. The exception for that tonight really is the one on Central Avenue. If you have interest in any of the items on the agenda, you're welcome to stay, of course, and participate. But this is not a public participation meeting for most of the items on the agenda yet. I'll say that. So, all right. Anybody else wish to come forward and talk to council tonight? I'm going to call one more time because people are often shy, but we're actually very friendly. Don't see any other people who indicate they wish to come forward and speak. All right. Thank you very much. We will come back. We'll move on with our agenda. We have, and we'll try and accommodate. If there's questions later, we can, we'll try and accommodate. If there's questions, please, we just jump up and ask. Item first on the agenda, 6.1, we have Oak Bay Fire Dispatch Contract Renewal. We have our Chief McDonald here from Oak Bay Fire. Welcome, Chief.
Good evening, Your Worship and members of council. As you've indicated, we've got our draft dispatch contract before us. Just to provide a little bit of context, Oak Bay Fire has been a client of Salish Fire Dispatch since 2004, and typically we have a 5-year contract renewal. So before us tonight, we have our draft contract. There are some cost savings that are outlined in the report, as well as some increases to service. And I'm happy to answer any questions that council may have at this time.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions of Chief McDonald on this item? I'm just looking online as well. I don't see any hands popping up. So before I get well, we can get a motion on the floor. If we
Move receipt.
moved and seconded. We don't usually just debate receipt. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed?
Move the recommendation.
Moved and seconded. That is to undertake the new contract with Salish Fire Dispatch. It's been a long relationship. I'm glad to see it's working fairly well for us. Obviously, there's a lot of change happening in the world of dispatch for protective services around BC, so it'll be interesting to see how this plays out in coming years. But nice to have this settled for the next 5. Seeing no other hands, I will call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. Thank you very much, Chief. I think you get off easy tonight. We should have put you at the end of the meeting. We have up next our zoning amendment and development permit for 2326 Oak Bay Avenue, the Quest, as most people know it. So with that, we have a staff report, and I believe Mr. Green is here to introduce it. Oh, and I had it highlighted here, Councillor Smart. My apologies. Please go ahead.
I wish to recuse myself due to a conflict of interest. I have a business relationship with the architect.
Thank you. We'll wait for you to leave the room, and then we will continue our business here. Okay, I think I could probably hand this over to Mr. Green, but I think just since I kind of gave a little early preamble to what I was going to say, maybe I'll just finish what I was going to say about the process, and you can fill in any gaps that I might leave here on this as well. So for those in the audience who are interested in this or watching online, this tonight is the first time that the revised application has come before council. So council's job tonight is to consider the application, ask questions of staff, and the applicant determine next steps. But just so you understand our process here, the land use applications are structured in a very deliberate way to allow for that stage consideration. There's a staff review, which considers the context of the OCP, regional growth strategy, and other land use guidance documents. advisories bodies such as the Advisory Design Panel, Advisory Planning Commission, and sometimes appropriately the Heritage Commission, if appropriate, provide their advice. And what you see tonight is that sort of collection of reports from staff and the advisory bodies coming to this table. This is our first chance to look at it, and that's why this is not a public input, because there are often times where this might come to this table and we might want a couple of tweaks and then go back and forth a bit, and then at that point go to a public hearing or some other public input process. There's two options for that. Staff will get into that, I'm sure. But that's the process we're at tonight. So we're really here just to kind of look at this application, consider it. Certainly we have been able to take in letters written to us over the last week or two on the application, but ultimately if we want to seek public input, we will do that through a formal process asking for that input. So I always feel bad because we really like public input, but tonight's kind of the night that we do the first step in this process. So with that, I will hand it over to Mr. Green, our Deputy Director of Community Building and Planning. Welcome.
Good evening, Your Worship, members of council. I do have a presentation that I'm hoping that my colleagues can put up on the screen for everybody to see. Great, thank you very much, and I'll ask the person to change slides when I'm ready. But yeah, good evening, Your Worship, members of council. This item is a rezoning development permit application for a property located at 2326 Oakby Avenue.
Excuse me
new
for a second.
application.
Just, sorry to interrupt, Mr.
Nope.
Green. Is there any way of getting the presentation on the other screen as well?
Good point.
And also shrink the faces as well, that would be helpful. But just if the people in the audience, do we have to shrink the people from here? I can do that, it's okay. Go ahead, Mr. Green.
So yeah, this application, this zoning amendment and development application for 2326 Oakby Avenue, this new application was opened on March the 7th of this year. Next slide, please. And so the applicant, Large & Co, has submitted a new application with a revised proposal following the previous proposal that was denied by council in March of 2022. The applicant is wanting to rezone the property from a one-family residential zone, the RS5 zone, to a new comprehensive development zone. And included within that rezoning application is a development permit for a new 4-storey, 15-unit, multi-unit residential building with underground parking. The property is designated in the district's OCP for multi-unit residential, and I will show that in a slide or two. Next slide, please. Just a bit of context. I'm sure everybody knows where this property is located by now, but just in case, here's an ortho photo showing the subject property located about 200 metres east of the village area. The site currently contains a single-family house, but is nestled between two 4-storey, multi-storey residential apartment buildings. And to the north of the subject property is a single-family house. Next slide, please. In terms of policy context, the site is designated in the district's official community plan as a multi-unit residential building. You can just see the property is outlined, delineated in red. It is designated as a multi-unit residential building and is also located within a multi-residential development permit area. Next slide, please. In terms of the district zoning bylaw, the site, as I mentioned earlier, is currently zoned for one-family residential, which is the RS5 zone, which allows a single-family dwelling to be located on the property. Next slide, please. And so, in terms of the proposal, or the new application and the revised proposal, here's a rendering of the proposed building. And I've got a few slides now showing the proposed elevations of that building. And so this rendering shows the property looking from the southwest on Oak Bay Avenue, shows the 4-storey building and the entrance to the underground parkade. Next slide, please. And so here's the south elevation and what the building will look like, essentially when viewed from Oak Bay Avenue. So here you can see the proposed 4-storey building nestled between those two existing 4-storey residential buildings which currently exist. Next slide, please. And then just a rendering of the east elevation. Next slide, please. And just on, sorry, yeah, next slide. Sorry, previous slide, east-west. And then just in terms of the east-west, so this is essentially looking from the side of the building. Here you can see the existing single-family dwelling to the north of the property, which is on York Place. And here's the north elevation. And the rendering in the bottom right-hand corner just shows the area where, and so I will show a slide which shows the changes that have been made to the proposal. But this slide just illustrates where that, essentially that 15 unit has been added into the proposal at the rear of the property. Next slide, please. In terms of the Gary Oak tree protection, important to show this slide as I think it was a key issue at the last time the application was presented to the public and to council. And so the revised proposal includes changes to the building as well as to the underground parking to ensure an additional 60 square metres of root habitat for the off-site Gary Oak. The applicant has also committed to additional tree protection measures to be put in place during construction, which will allow the trees preservation in the medium to long term. The district's arborist has been involved throughout this new application and has reviewed the applicant's 2 arborist report and is satisfied with the proposed tree protection measures proposed by the applicant. Just a slide just showing the scope of the changes since the 2022 application in terms of building design. The building has been changed, particularly in relation to the roof design has been altered, resulting in a slight reduced building height from 13.78 metres to 13.2 metres. However, the number of units has increased from 14 to 15 units. In terms of the proposed floor area ratio, including the underground parkade, that is 2.74. I know there was an error in my staff report, which I apologise for, but the overall FAR, including the underground parkade, and so there is no exemptions in the district zoning bylaw for multi-unit residential buildings where there is for single-family dwellings. However, there is no exemption for multi-unit buildings in terms of gross floor area in relation to multi-unit buildings. So the overall FAR is 2.74. Excluding the underground parkade, the FAR will be 1.89. There's been a number of sustainability features added to the new building, including solar panels added to the rooftop, some changes to building design internally in terms of 5 units to be built to adaptable standards to be adaptable in the future, as well as change to some of the building materials, mainly change from wood to metal to in relation to, I guess, increased construction costs that have taken place since the last application. So there's been changes to the proposed materials to the exterior, moving from more wood to metal, which will also be have some long-term benefits in terms of future maintenance. In addition, there's also been some further reports submitted to address some of the concerns and issues that were raised previously. So a revised tree management plan has been submitted, a revised transportation demand management strategy has been submitted, a traffic and parking review has been submitted to address some of the concerns in relation to the pedestrian crosswalk and the entrance and exit of the underground parking. A geotechnical study has been submitted. There was previously a housing agreement, but that is now not required due to changes to the Strata Property Act, which now doesn't allow certain restrictions to be placed on strata properties. And there was also a community information meeting held on April the 3rd of this year to present the revised proposal and a chance for the public to ask questions of the applicant. The applicant is also offering a significant community amenity contribution package. The district does have a community amenity contribution policy, And in this case, they are offering the $4,000 per unit as per the district's policy. In addition to that cash contribution, the applicant is also providing a number of on-site, off-site amenities, including sidewalk improvements, an enhanced pedestrian crossing, as well as some other public and relevant improvements, which come to a value of just over $140,000. In terms of policy context, staff have reviewed the application in accordance with the hierarchy of policy documents, including the regional growth strategy, the official community plan, as well as the district zoning bylaw, which are sort of covered in detail in the staff report of how this proposal aligns with those overarching policy documents. This application was presented to the advisory design panel on July the 18th of this year, and the advisory design panel unanimously supported the application. The application was also presented to the Advisory Planning Commission on July the 19th, I should say, and again, the Advisory Planning Commission unanimously supported the application as well. In terms of staff's overall summary, staff have reviewed this new application in accordance with OCP, regional growth strategy, as well as the district's development permit area guidelines, which are contained within the OCP. Reviewed the proposed zoning bylaw amendments in relation to the comprehensive development zone that's been being created for the site. Considered the overall site design, as well as the existing and proposed surrounding context. And as a result of that review, staff overall believe that the application is in alignment with the district's OCP and development permit guidelines, and believe that the application is supportable, subject to a section 219 being registered on title to secure the proposed amenity contribution package that the applicant is proposing, and to ensure some of those amenities that are shown on the in the building design are secured and undertaken as part of a building permit. That all being said, there is a number of options for council with this application. And so the first option is that council directs staff to give notice of council's intent to consider first reading of the amendment bylaw and approve the development permit. And that's the staff's recommendation. And so there has been a change in the provincial legislation. So in September of last year, there was a change in the legislation in regards to public hearings. And so the legislation was changed in September of last year. So basically the wording of the legislation now says that where a proposal is consistent with an OCP, a public hearing is not required. However, what this does is essentially it allows the public still to be involved and to still make comments on the application prior to council considering first reading. So if council went with this staff recommendation, what would happen is that staff would essentially send letters to all neighbouring property owners and tenants within 50 metres of the property. We would also put 2 adverts in the paper, and we would be advertising the fact that council is considering giving first reading to the bylaw on a certain date, and that would allow the public to weigh in prior to council's consideration of first reading. If council, once it's received all that correspondence and heard from the public when it considers first reading, it could also still allow for a public hearing to take place, should council so choose. In addition to hearing from the public at first reading, council could still hold a public hearing, or council could still waive the public hearing at that time. The second option is that the more traditional route of applications is that council could give first and second reading to the bylaw either this evening, because the bylaw is attached to the staff report, or direct staff to bring that bylaw back for first and second reading and for council to schedule a public hearing. And then the third option is that council can deny the zoning application and development permit this evening or at a later date, or provide some alternate direction to staff. And so in terms of staff's recommendation is that recommendation of staff is that council direct staff to bring forward zoning bylaw amendment number 4847 to create a comprehensive development zone for the property located at 2326 Oak Bay Avenue for first and second, third reading. And that council direct staff to give notice that it will consider giving first reading to that bylaw to create a comprehensive development zone, subject to a number and following conditions of approval. Next slide, please. Subject to the package of, essentially the package of amenities, including the cash contribution to the amenity contribution, ensuring the proposed development is built to step code 3, securing the travel demand measures, the sustainability features, the tree preservation measures, securing the adaptable units, the stormwater management system and maintenance plan, as well as ensuring those off-site improvements get completed. And then also that the adoption of that bylaw would not be considered until that legal agreement is essentially registered to the satisfaction of the Director of Community Building and Planning. Essentially that concludes my presentation. Staff is happy to answer your questions. We also have the applicant as well as the applicant's architect, and I believe the arborist here as well, in case there are any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Green. And we have, I'm sure we have multiple questions. I have Councillor Green's hand up, and since you're fast on the take there, Councillor Green, we get to go first. Welcome.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yes, go ahead, Councillor Green.
Oh, thank you. I'm sorry. Thank you very much, Mr. Green, through you, Mayor. Thank you very much, Mr. Green, and thank you for all the comprehensive input and the lengthy report. Very much appreciate it. I just have a couple of questions. The first one relates to the payment of a $50,000 community amenity contribution. Is that consistent with other contributions that have been made on a project of this size and scope? That's the first question. And then my second question through you, is it possible for council to direct that hoe ramming, which is a form of digging out rock, as we know, it's very difficult. It's a very challenging process. Is there any potential for council to direct that hoe ramming not be employed in this case, and further that low impact blasting be employed in this case? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Green. I will turn to staff on those two questions. One, how is the CAC generated? And second, if not at this meeting, is there any capacity for setting restrictions on the type or mechanisms of blasting or rock removal? Mr. Green?
I can certainly answer the first question. And so the district does have a community amenity contribution policy, and it sets out the suggested levels of contribution that applicants should pay based on the type of units. And so the district's policy does set out $4,000 per apartment unit, and so the applicant is providing that amount. It is essentially a voluntary contribution. I'm not aware of, given I'm so new to the district, as to what other applicants have provided that have gone for a rezoning application, but I would generally thought that it would be either in accordance with that policy, or that they may have chosen not to provide that contribution, which is also, I guess, their right, and council can then weigh in on whether to approve or deny the application based on whether they are making that contribution or not. And so, yeah, so they are, essentially the contribution is in accordance with the district's policy, to cut a long answer short. And in terms of the ability to employ low blasting, we would have to do some further research or further look into that issue as to whether we can control how a site is excavated.
Okay.
Thank you. And just a supplementary, I believe there is a geotechnical engineer's report included as well. So I'm just wondering if it would be possible to, through you, Mayor, to Mr. Green, would it be possible to consult with that geotechnical engineer on the kind of blasting that will be employed on this particular lot? And I raise this because it is a very tight space and very close to adjacent buildings. And so, as well, the hoe ramming aspect of blasting is extremely intrusive in terms of both noise and shaking foundations and so on. So that was the reason for my question. So I would appreciate any follow-up to the question, particularly around blasting, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Green. I might invite the applicant just if they want to add anything. I don't believe anybody HORAMs unless it's absolutely necessary because it's so expensive. Getting nods of head here for that one. In terms of the expansion crack methodology, also very expensive, I believe, but I don't know, unless staff comes back with that guidance that we have that jurisdiction to require that. Maybe we'll leave that question for the time being, Councillor Green. But just so you know, the applicant did agree that they were not HORAMing as part of this process.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Thanks very much.
No problem. I have Councillor Patterson next.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you to staff and the proponents, perhaps. I do appreciate the reports that were given. I also just want to express appreciation for some of the changes made to the design, particularly for the sustainability of the building, the improved sustainability of the building, and also consideration for the adaptable housing units within the building. I think that certainly is an improvement to previous versions that we have looked at. But I do have a couple of clarifications, I guess, because of perhaps language that was used that varied between the staff's report and the development report. And so just for clarifications so that I get the exact context. We're all certainly aware that the province of BC does now have a Housing Supply Act and that there are metrics that go with that. In the report, it did say there's 15 units now proposed, 1, 2, and 2-bedroom with den units, and they're all referred to as above average sized units. And I'm seeking clarification on what that means, and perhaps even in comparison to adjacent buildings. What do we mean when we talk about above average sized units?
Mr. Green?
Great question. Through the chair, great question. I don't want to try to defer, but I think that might be best answered by the applicant's architect, who probably is more familiar with recent, given that their involvement in other recent projects, both in Oak Bay and in Victoria. They may have some commentary on the size of units that they have been recently designing and building.
Mr. Jakinek, welcome to the meeting.
Great, thank you. Good evening, Your Worship and Council. So through you to Councillor Patterson, it's a difficult question to answer. A lot depends on where development is located. Typically downtown and in more dense urban areas, units start to get smaller and smaller. In a situation like this, where we're in a, we're close to the Oak Bay Village, we're in an OCP designated multifamily area, but we're not in a high, like a tower type situation like downtown. I think these units are probably relatively typical, ranging from 750 to just over 1,100 square feet. We, in our work, find some of our ground-oriented units, can range anywhere from 1,500 to 1,800 square feet. Some of our penthouse units can be over 1,500 square feet. Typically, 2 bedrooms are in this 750 to 1,000 square foot range as an average, I would say. And 1 bedrooms are in the sort of 600 square foot range, or 500 to 600 square foot range. I don't know if that provides.
Thank you. I think there was also, if I can't find it here, but I believe in the report where that was mentioned, was also talking about unit minimums that we have within Oak Bay in terms of the size, and I think that identifying that these are all above that minimum for those apartment types. So there was no variance required on that front.
If I could continue. It also suggests in the report that the penthouse unit is being proposed to make the project economically viable, which could be read as projects that are 14 units of this nature would not be financially viable to construct in the district of Oak Bay. which with some of our housing modeling we're doing, sounds a little discouraging. So perhaps if we could clarify perhaps a little more of the intent behind that.
Yeah, well, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, all construction currently is very challenged financially. I'll just say, as a broad comment, many projects that we are working on are challenged to achieve the minimum profit percentage required to be able to finance a project through the banks. And we are actually seeing a lot of projects going for things like surface parking instead of underground parking because there's such a significant cost in underground parking. And so I think what you're seeing with the addition of the unit back into this project is simply a financial reality that the proponent is facing. That, in the years that they've been planning this project, construction costs have been escalating at about 10% a year. For the last 4 or 5 years continuously. And so I think that's what's happened here.
Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you for that information. Just touching on the provincial guidelines and the adaptable housing that is proposed for the building now, the staff report shows 5 units built to provincial adaptable housing standards. The developer summary on page 23 shows designed to adaptable housing standards. So what I'm wondering is, will the units actually be adapted at the time of construction versus after construction, and are there additional upfront or after purchase costs to create this type of housing?
Again, thank you for the question, and through you, Mayor. It's a very good question. So I think just to clarify, yes, they're currently designed to meet the BC Building Code requirements for adaptable housing. And if the project is approved and proceeds, they would be built to those same standards. What that means is that they are ready for, in a relatively simple way, to be altered to be fully accessible. For somebody with mobility issues. So they're not fully accessible when they're adaptable, but there are clearances around doors, and the bathrooms and the kitchens are configured in such a way that they can be simply adapted without significant cost. But there would be costs to make them accessible. What I would expect to happen is, before construction, when the applicant would be selling units, they would have the opportunity, or people looking to purchase would have the opportunity to make changes within the unit and have the unit built to a fully accessible condition without, significant cost change, because it would just be a reconfiguration of the design drawings. So that would be, something that would be initiated by a purchaser. Once they're built, obviously anybody, maybe a second purchaser or a renter or, that kind of a situation, then you would be looking at a retrofit to make the unit fully accessible.
Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yeah, thank you. And just continuing on that, where in the building are these units proposed to be located?
So I think you all have building plans in your package, and we are looking at just making sure I've got it correct here. So the suite type, the suite D, of which there are 2, and the suite E, of which there are 2. So those are the second and third floor, the north-facing units. So there's 2 of each of those. So that's 4. And on the penthouse level, the suite K, which is coincidentally above the D stack, is also. So it's basically the ones on the north side, both north side facing units on the second and third floor, plus the northwest facing unit on the top floor.
Councillor Patterson.
Yeah, I thought that's what I was viewing on the drawing, and I'm just wondering about locating units lower in the building.
Because of the, yeah, I think, I hesitate to answer that question on, on the fly. But I think the unit at grade under each of those is very similar. But I suspect, sorry, I just want to make sure my question is, or my answer is accurate. Yeah, so the building envelope is tucked under at the ground floor, which makes those units smaller, and I think prohibits the ability to get the clearances into those units.
Thank you. I also noticed that the garage does have just one stall that is designated as accessible. Is that in keeping with what other buildings would be doing if you're trying to achieve adaptable housing, is to just have one stall accessible?
Yeah, through.
Go ahead, Mr. Hackenick. Yeah.
Yeah, it's actually Mr. Demand.
Oh, Mr. Demand, sorry.
No problem. Yeah.
I should know that.
Yeah.
My apologies.
Yeah. Peter's enjoying the sunny shores in Amalfi right now. So
Very nice.
lucky Peter. Accessible parking stalls are quite substantially wider than regular, and so to add more accessible stalls here would result in a reduction in parking provision, and the BC Building Code requirement is for one accessible parking stall. So the project is meeting the code requirements.
Anything else, Councillor Patterson?
Thank you. I have a few more questions, Mayor, if I might continue. Just on the really transportation traffic issues. The report showed an estimate of 70 trips daily. I'm wondering if this the statistic is for residents and visitors, or does it also include, say, service providers that might be required by people, trades, housekeeping, medical assistance, trips of that nature, if that's been considered?
Mr. Devant, do you know the answer to that question?
I can't definitively answer that question. We could certainly contact the authors of the traffic study to confirm that for you.
Go ahead.
And the on page 26, I guess the pedestrian sidewalk master plan is referred to, and it says it requires a 2-meter sidewalk and a crosswalk to calm the area. And there is, of course, the sidewalk improvement contribution of $60,000. And it talks about the sidewalk will be widened into the private realm. Does this mean that it's kind of a shared sidewalk, or how how is that being handled?
Sure. Mr. Devant?
Yeah. So through you, Mayor, there's a dedication of a portion of the property to Oak Bay. So effectively, there's a land transfer of a piece of the property to Oak Bay, and then that would be used to widen the existing sidewalk.
Thank you.
Yeah, so then it isn't just an easement, it's actually a transfer back to the municipality. Okay, that answers that question. Thank you very much for the information. The OCP, of course, shows the lot as multi-unit residential, as the staff put in their presentation, because the location is adjacent to public transportation and within walking distance to all amenities. But we still require 14 units, which is somewhat contrary, I think, to what the OCP envisions for a walkable community. So I'm wondering that in this case, are the parking requirements determined by the marketing strategy as opposed to practical needs and environmental sustainability of the community?
I guess that's a question for the applicant more than anything else. Go ahead, Mr. Devant.
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think there's a number of factors that contribute to the ratio of parking that's being provided to the project. One is certainly, there's consideration for the market and what the probable purchasers, I believe the expectation is that most of these purchasers will be Oak Bay residents who want to stay in Oak Bay but want to leave their houses and have single level living or something like that. But obviously that's a hypothetical situation, but so there's that consideration of the market. There's also the consideration of the urban context, and being located so close to the village, walkable and with good public transit on Oak Bay Avenue. I think there's also probably an expectation that purchasers will be more willing to give up a vehicle if they have more than one, because of that prime location and that very walkable context, and because of the provision for electric bikes, charging, and things like that provide people with good mobility options. And then the simple reality of the site and the size of the site also factor into the amount of parking that's provided. So really, it's a balancing act on a number of fronts in terms of what's appropriate for the site, given its overall location, given the size of the site, and given the context with the multi-unit buildings beside on each side. And so, all those factors weigh in. Ultimately, it's the decision of the developer that they're comfortable with the ratio, that they feel that it's going to work for them as a product.
Thank you. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mayor. I was hoping there might be ways to reduce the parking further since it was so close to public transportation. Page 23 refers to air exchange and heat and cooling. Is the building equipped with a cooling system? That I think that is particular interest to most people now, since we've suffered through 2 summers of quite extensive heat.
Mr. Devon?
Through you, Mayor. So at this stage, those sorts of systems are not designed, but it is the proponent's intention to provide cooling within the units as part of the overall design. So when we go eventually to, let's say, if the project is approved and we go to make a building permit application, it's at that point that we'd be including all those sorts of systems.
Anything else, Councillor Patterson?
Yeah, and just touching on that, again, thinking of the adaptable units in the building, will the building be adapted with supplemental power generation in case of power outage? I think certainly depending on what the adaptability is required, sometimes you need the power for lighting that flashes or things like that. So I'm just wondering about how the building will respond to that type of event.
Mr. Devon?
I think the simplest answer is to say that the building will be designed to meet the building code requirements for those sorts of conditions. So all buildings have to have a certain amount of emergency power for power outs, so that fire alarm systems are still functional and things like that. This building does have the advantage with the solar photovoltaic cells on the roof that it might be possible to, those will involve battery backup and so on. It might be possible to employ that for some of the systems in the building as well, but I think at this point it's premature to commit to anything like that.
Thank you. Councillor Patterson?
Thank you, Mayor. And I think now I have a question that goes back to our district staff. It does say in the report the impact on municipal services is implied to be minimal, but determined only prior to the issuance of the building permit. So I'm wondering if the impact is greater than anticipated for municipal services, could there be potential added expense that would have to be borne by the district?
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Is that Mr. Green or Mr. Bowl? I'm not sure who wishes to answer that question. Someone has to push a button.
I'll
Mr.
push the
Boole.
button. Yeah, well, that's the thing with, sometimes there's some unknowns, but I think depending on, there's the part of the conditions that go with the zoning bylaw, that is at some point that's fixed, that's an arrangement, but there's also improvements related to the project itself under the subdivision bylaw. Those are to the cost that it costs to do the work, and if that changes down the road, that becomes simply a cost that the applicant in this case needs to bear. So that's how it falls in kind of 2 categories.
Councillor Patterson?
That concludes my questions, Mayor. I will pass the floor to another member of council. Thank you.
Take a talking stick and move it around here. Is there any other, I have other questions from members of council, the applicant, or the staff? I don't see other hands popping up. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, a couple of things. I think there's a couple of good things about this application, and that's the motor car share, the secure adaptable units, and the sustainable features, as Councillor Patterson has mentioned. But a couple of things just in some of the questions that Councillor Patterson asked, and from the staff presentation, I have a question on. In our staff presentation, it says the payment of $50,000 community humanity contribution, but in your staff report or your staff slides, you said 56,000, but then you said $15,000 or for $4,000 for 15 units, which in my head, 15 times 4 is 60. So I'm wondering what the actual amount is.
Yes, good question. And me and my colleague were just working out and looking at what the applicant had proposed in their letter versus what I might report, and I think that's something that we'll need to go back to the applicant just to confirm. Obviously, the applicant has said that they're willing to meet the district's amenity contribution policy, and therefore that would equate to 4,000 per unit, which would equate to 60,000. And so I think I'm hoping that was a typo in the applicant's submission, and so that we will seek clarification from the
I
applicant.
believe we
on
have
that.
an applicant nearby that we could get some
Sure.
clarification from, so, Mr. Dumont?
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. So that probably is a typo. The intention is to meet the district's guideline per unit, which would, I think my math matches yours. That would be 60,000, yeah.
Our math matches now, yes. And then also on the slide presentation that was done, it said off-site amenities including sidewalk improvements, enhanced pedestrian crossing, and public realm improvements valued at $140,750. Is that in addition to the $60,000, or does that include the $60,000? Because I think that's a big point.
So I think that should include the 60, yes. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. I'll move on to my next question, or my next comment. And I think Councillor Patterson mentioned about, you brought up something about having to go to 15 units, and I believe that the proponent said that it's because of costs. And I just want to say one comment on that. I think that the cost may have gone up, but the value that you're able to sell those units for has gone up as well. So I would imagine that's almost a wash. So to me, that's not a big reason to add another unit, because I think that as building costs go up, you're able to ask for more. As my house has gone up in value, those would have gone up in value as well. So that's just a comment. So I'm going to go to my other questions now, which are, I had a lot of questions around blasting, actually. Now, because I think that's one of the biggest things that I noticed out of some of the letters that came forward was about the blasting. So do we have any idea how much rock would actually be removed? And so how many truckfuls of rock would have to be taken off that property and moved on our streets out of our community?
Do you know, Mr. Dumont?
I don't have the answer to that question, no. It is possible, when a site is cleared, to do investigative drilling over the whole site and establish the topography of the rock underneath the site, and then you have a definitive answer. But at this point, with the house on the site and the existing landscape and so on, that's not possible. So we would just be guessing.
I think that might be of interest to a lot of people to see how much rock actually gets removed, and it does do wear and tear on our streets when things like that happen. And we have another property very close to that had massive amounts of rock removed, and it really did affect the roads around there. So I think that's something we really have to look at, because it would then be on us to be fixing those roads. So I think my other question would be around the trees. I noticed that in the staff report, there's now a report on a tree behind the proposed building on York Place, and it's, I believe, a red cedar tree, and I don't think that was ever included before because our tree bylaw had changed, I believe. So when I read that report, it said that tree would probably not be impacted too terribly much. I'm really surprised at that because it looks like how the blasting would go right up to the edge of that. So do you have any comment on the tree, on that particular tree?
Mr. Devon?
So the project arborist is here as well, and perhaps Mike just jump up and correct me if I speak in error. But my understanding is that essentially, when looking at the tree and the impact on the tree, you consider the percentage of the root area that would be impacted, and based on the location of the trees and the size of them, it's estimated that the amount of root area that would be impacted by the excavation is, I think, 15%, which is a safe amount. So it's not, it's the opinion of the arborist that it's not going to be an issue.
I couldn't remember if it was 15 or 30, so, okay. And then my next question is in regards to height of the building. I know that you have lowered the height of the building, but in relation to when you're looking at the building from Oak Bay Avenue to the east, I think, to the right, is that correct? Is that east? To the east? How much higher is the building, because there is a slope on that side, so how much higher, and I know it's in the report somewhere, but how much higher is the building than that building to the east, to the roof line to roof line?
Mr. Devon?
I'm sorry, I don't have the specific figure. I think we're approximately 1 story taller, so 1 floor higher than the building to the east, but similar to the building to the west, which is also approximately 1 story higher than the building to the east, partly due to the topography, the rise of the.
Sorry, maybe I'm doing it wrong. So I understand that it's on a slope.
Yeah.
So this building is going to be a little bit shorter than your building, but then this building, your building should be shorter than this building, but in actual fact, it's the other way around, correct?
Yeah, in actual fact, we are approximately the same height for all intents and purposes as the building to the west. And the reason for that is the floor-to-floor height. So one of the sustainability initiatives that we are pursuing is the use of energy recovery ventilation systems in the units, which add thickness to our floor assembly for all the ductwork that you didn't used to have in the older buildings. So our floor-to-floor rises. I think a lot of the older buildings also had 8-foot ceilings, and our intent is to achieve close to 9 feet with these ceilings, which again is kind of just a change in people's expectation over the years. So those are the reasons for the difference in height.
And one more question, if I may, and I think this probably goes to staff. In regards to the use of the units within the building, if this building was to go ahead, and they're being sold as condos, but would they be able to be used as Airbnbs, or could we, in our bylaws, and I know we don't allow Airbnbs in Oak Bay, but could we have written in the bylaws around the building, just as we did with the Bowker, that no Airbnb or no short-term rentals, I guess is what that equates to, be allowed in that building?
Mr. Green?
Through the chair, yeah, so the district zoning bylaw doesn't allow short-term rentals of less than 30 days. I guess that can, if council wishes to add an additional covenant or as part of the covenant to that to make it a belt and braces approach that there shall not be vacation rentals within those units. That is at council's discretion, I guess, in relation to that Section 209 agreement.
Thanks. I'll give the floor to someone else for now.
Thank you. Belt and braces, I haven't heard that.
Oh, you might
I haven't heard that for a long time.
Belt and suspenders.
That's a
here,
very
do you, or something?
English,
Yeah,
very
there you
English
go.
phrase, yes.
My English coming out there.
Any other questions from Councillor Appleton? I don't see a hand popping up at this point. I just have a couple of, I think most of my questions have been answered, but just a question from when I was looking at the drawings, it looked like it was still sort of a stucco and wood cladding. So can you just highlight to me what's changed in terms of what's become metal in that design?
Yes, Mayor. The metal panel is on the side elevations. If you where the windows are, you'll see there's a kind of a band that the windows are collected in, and so that is metal with a couple different tones of color in it, just to basically create a bit of visual liveliness in the in the composition of the building.
Right.
Otherwise, as you say, it's a stucco and then wood grain cladding typical.
Okay, no, thank you.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm not going so insane now, that's good.
No.
And can I just ask, I was reading the notes from the public input meeting in April, and it looked like there were some questions there about the roof height and angle. So was that change in the roof done after that meeting? Because it looked like that was in response. Is that,
That's right, that's correct.
for those online who couldn't hear, that was?
That's right. So
the answer
I'll
for the
just
audience.
repeat it. Yeah, but that's right. That change was in response to the public meeting.
Okay, thank you for that. And I guess one of the things I did appreciate in the last version of this was that cutaway to allow for a little bit of shading reduction on the house in behind, because I think it's the one area where there's a distinct impact on neighbors. Could you perhaps just articulate what that difference makes? I was looking at the shading, but I don't have a comparator between the two in terms of what impact the shading would have on that, with that essentially enclosing what was a patio before into an apartment.
Yeah, so I think the easiest way to summarize it is to say that in the summertime, there'll be no difference in terms of the impact shading-wise. And you can see that in the summer solstice shading diagrams, that the building shadow doesn't reach the neighboring property. I think you can see in the spring, so 2 times a year, or in the shoulder seasons, the shading does reach the building behind. And so but it's more than just the 4th story is reaching that building. So I think the relative impact of the change on the shading is not as significant as you might think. And then in the winter, obviously all the buildings the 2 buildings on either side of this building are also reaching deep into the neighborhood behind, and their shadow is sweeping all the houses behind. I think the only thing I'd like to point out is that in the winter the sun doesn't actually shine that often, and so it's we tend to get really uptight about the shading diagrams, but the fact is that the majority of our skies through the winter are white skies, and the ambient light is directionless.
Thank you for that. I think that concludes my questions at this time. Are there any other questions from members of council to staff or to the applicant? Then I guess the contemplation here. I should just give an opportunity, though, just because we had a staff presentation, so this differs a little bit from, say, a public hearing where the applicant gives a presentation and there's sort of some Q&A back and forth. So this is just a chance. So we presented the application. We've all read through the application in detail. You're here to answer questions. Is there questions that were raised here, or something that came in the presentation that you would like anything to kind of fill in a gap or anything else at this point?
Thank you, Your Worship. I think it's clear that the council members understand the application quite well, and I think there's a couple things that we can certainly try and get a bit more information on if council moves the project forward. There was questions, I think, about the specific height difference. We might be able to talk to the geotechnical engineer a bit more about whether there's any more clarity that can be provided around the blasting potential on the site and things like that. So we'll take those questions away and try and develop some additional responses.
Thank you for that. Thank you. I had one other question for you. So I think I know the answer looking at the application. I'm not 100% clear. It looks like this building will be slightly more forward on the lot than the 2 adjoining buildings. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Can you quantify that amount? They're not exactly aligned either, but just if you could.
No, I think so. Our front setback is about almost 5 meters. Let me just find the. We're basically 4.97 meters, so 5 meters, which is about 16 and a half, 17 feet. And so I don't know how far back the other buildings are, but I can tell you that the Clive, for reference, is approximately 4.5 meters from the street. So to its, and then it steps in at the ground floor.
Right.
So you know, that gives you kind of a built example.
Yeah, the easiest way I can look at it is the green space diagram on page, whatever, page 24 of 84. And that, it's hard to tell because it includes the paving of the driveway. But it looks like the main face of the building is slightly in front of the other two buildings on that lineup. So I think you've answered the question to my satisfaction at that point, so thank you. My question in many ways related to, is there any way of creeping that building forward a little bit to give some more space in the back? But my read of that is it's not really possible given the nature of that site.
That's right, and we're kind of anchored by the building core, the stairs and the elevator to the underground. So if the building moves forward, then we start to lose parking. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And that ramp is at its maximum elevation, is it right now? Yeah.
That's
Okay.
right, yeah.
Thank you. It's a tight spot no matter how you cut it. So thank you.
Okay.
I don't see any other questions at this time of the applicant. So. Oh yeah, please go ahead, Councilor Braithwaite.
Sorry, and it's to do with blasting again, because I know that this came up a lot from some of the people who've had concerns about this property, and that is that none of the other properties around there have basements. So not one has a basement. None of the houses have a basement, and neither of the apartment buildings have a basement. They have surface parking. And one of my colleagues had said to me that's not the way of the 21st century, surface parking. However, I wonder have you taken that into consideration as well, that there's a reason that none of the other properties have blasted from end to end of a property in the past. Have you... can you just talk me kind of through that? And I understand it so that you get the maximum of the maximum number of units above the ground. But when you look at all the properties around and they have no blasting whatsoever, they have no basement whatsoever, perhaps you can just do an explanation of that for the audience.
Go ahead,
Yeah,
Mr. Vermont.
through you, Mayor. I can't really speculate as to why people chose to not go underground previously. I can tell you that the blasting is not, it is a well-defined, well-understood method of construction now, and the contractors doing blasting, they're properly insured. They do surveys of the adjacent properties. They are quite sophisticated now in terms of calculating their blast loads and tailoring the type of blasting to the conditions. And so we see blasting in really tight situations all the time. For example, the Bellwood Park project on Upper Fort Street, where the buildings are kind of slotted in very close to all those existing Gary Oaks. That was all blasted through there without damaging those trees, which are quite sensitive. So I don't think we should be worried about the blasting.
And thank you for that, but just to follow up, because I know that will be a big angst for people that live around there. And you've said that the blasting people are insured, etc. I know that there was a big blasting area quite close to that property, and there was damage on some of the houses, cracking in the foundations, etc., etc. And I think that if this were to go forward, that it would have to be something that would be really well documented and really let people ask a lot of questions in regards to that, because it's something that people have a lot of angst over. How is the blasting going to affect my property?
Right.
So I think that that's something that we should really be really aware of.
Thank you, Councilor Braithwaite. She's right. I mean, that's probably the single biggest anxiety people have around it. And I think it really came to the fore during COVID when people couldn't blast because of some of the issues, and we got into home ramming, and we had this absolute misery of long noise, banging for months on end at times, and it was quite painful. So I think we're extra cognizant right now in the community about the psychological impacts of that noise on neighbors. So Yeah, thank you for raising that. Councillor Green? Councillor Green, if you're speaking, we can't hear you. You don't appear to be muted. Oh, technology, we love you so much. No, you're unmuted, but you're inaudible for some reason. Does your device happen to connect to wireless headphones or anything by? Oh, you've been on here for quite a while. It's been working. No, we still can't hear you. Do you want to? I'll give you a chance to maybe just log out and log in again if you wish, or try a different device. Okay, we'll just give you a moment before we go to any kind of motions or anything else. Technology. So, assuming she also has one more question, is there any other pieces around this table? Last chance for additional questions. Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Dumont. I'm sure you don't have a question, but
I don't. But if I may just respond to you did ask if anything I wanted to add in terms of the commentary, and I think there were some questions around the underground parking and the decision around that. It's just, I think, worth noting that we have all around the building is landscaped. So if we had surface parking, we would lose that landscaping, and so we would have significantly less green space. Less contribution to the ecosystem of the area and so on, and more heat warming effect and all of the kind of the bad things associated with surface parking lots. So there are additional considerations that factor into that as well, and benefits to the project to going underground.
thank you for that, Mr. Dumont. I have Councillor Green back again. No video, but you appear to be unmuted. Councillor Green, can you hear us? Why is this so hard? I definitely don't want to exclude Councillor Green from asking her question. Councillor Green, if you still can't get this to work through your device, it may be worthwhile just to call the 1-855 number on the agenda package. That's the 1-855-703-8985 with the ID ending in 8716. Because we cannot hear you speaking right now. I'm hoping you can hear me telling you that we can't hear you speaking right now. Councillor Patterson?
Yes, just Mayor, I'm wondering if while we're waiting, I could just move receipt of the report.
Sure, we can certainly do some of the procedural pieces. We'll consider Councillor Green not part of the, left the meeting for momentarily. Oh, she's there. Can she call, you have her on speakerphone? Is it possible for her to call into the Zoom so it's part of our system and we can *9 to unmute and mute? Otherwise, it's a very kludgy system. Because we're here for the rest of the night, so I don't. Yes.
I'm sorry. Thank you.
Since she's going to call in again, I'm going to ask another question just because I think it's a point that always kind of comes to my mind. We have the floor area ratio as a means of doing sort of comparators between different buildings and so forth, and it does give a pretty good indication of the sense of massing of buildings. Although, and this is at the high end of the buildings that we have in Oak Bay, not the highest. Perhaps you could just articulate to us as an architect that 1.88 number, what has been done to kind of mitigate the sense of massing and how it's contextually within the framework of the buildings around it, because I think I think for many people looking at, either the 2.74 number, I think that's an inappropriate, because we think about FAR, we tend to think about it from above ground perspective. It's really an issue of a sense of massing, so I think that's the wrong number. So in this case, the 1.88 number.
Yeah. I mean,
Go ahead, please.
yeah, okay. So FAR is really a very difficult metric to apply to be able to develop any kind of understanding of a building. Partly because every municipality calculates it differently, and Oak Bay has your own way of calculating it. So we can't compare even outside of Oak Bay. But for example, Salish has given up using what they call FSR, and instead just talk in terms of height and setbacks. And I think from our point of view, when we approach a site like this, FAR is pretty much the last thing on our minds. What we're more interested in is the contextual fit, and because FAR is based on property lines, and property lines are very arbitrary. Nobody knows, when you walk through a city, you don't know where the property lines are, but you know where the buildings are. You can see the spacing between the buildings, and so this project, like any other, when we're designing it, we're obviously working to what's a functional floor plate. We have hallway corridor widths that we have to achieve, and exit stair widths that we have to achieve, and room widths that are, functional, and that kind of tends to build out a building's footprint. But we also look at how it's fitting in the context, quite literally as a block, compared to the ones around it. And, the spacing between the building and its two four-story neighbors either side is actually quite comfortable. And that's where, for me personally, as architect designing a project like this, that's where my comfort level lies, is in the built form around the project. And yes, the house behind us is very, very close to the property line, which means that there is less distance between our building and that house. But it's, we basically have to balance all of those criteria that we were talking about, like the parking and the configuration of the parking, and then relation to the street, and ultimately we end up with the building footprint that we do. All of which is a very long way of saying that my suggestion would be to not put too much emphasis on the FAR number as a way of evaluating the proposal, or any proposal.
Thank you for answering the question. Go ahead, Councillor Green. I asked just a question if the architect could just talk to the FAR, FSR number. So that was what that answer was he was giving when you came back. So please go ahead.
Yes, I'm so sorry with the frustration around technology tonight. I just wanted to add my voice to the voice of Councillor Braithwaite on the blasting issue. And I realize that that blasting is a common practice in many communities, and I also realize that there are new methodologies and so on. But I think for all of us that are observers or spectators of blasting, we do not have to live through it. At this point, I don't think any of us at this table, or probably in the audience, apart from interested residents nearby, will have to live through the blasting and live through the environmental impacts of blasting as this construction is ongoing. So that's my only concern, and I'm really hoping very much that the developer and his or her team will take the blasting concerns very seriously. And really, it would be terrific if the development team, if this project is approved, could actually sit down with nearby neighbors and talk to them face to face. I know that the Clive was quite contentious at the beginning, but that developer worked very closely with the neighborhood for many, many weeks to resolve a lot of the issues that were concerning to the people nearby. I think what's unfortunate about something like this is that neighbors then are cast as being so-called NIMBYs, and their concerns are not viewed as perhaps serious or valid in some circles. And I would really like us to dispose ourselves of that feeling. So any issue that can be resolved or addressed on blasting would be appreciated. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Green. I want to delineate between the question portion of this meeting and the commentary. So did I call the question on the receipt of the agenda? Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to call the question on receipt of the report. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. And then we really have in front of us, yeah, go ahead, Councillor Watson.
I would like to move the staff recommendations, please, that we bring forward a zoning bylaw amendment for first, second, and third reading, and that council directs staff to give notice that will consider giving first reading to the bylaw to create a comprehensive development zone for this property, subject to the conditions that were laid out in the staff recommendation in the report.
Thank you, Councillor Watson.
And sorry, just through the chair, I'd just like to make that change to that in relation to the conditions that payment in relation to the CAC contribution be increased from 50,000 to 60,000, so that council is clear on that, subject to the following conditions and securing the following. So that should be payment of a $60,000 community maintenance contribution, not 50,000.
I just want to make sure that that's, okay, thank you. Is that so moved? Thank you, Councillor Watson. With that clarification, staff, is there a seconder for that motion?
Second.
Moved and seconded, thank you. This is the point we get to have debate, discussion on the motion that's on the floor. Councillor Watson, you made the motion and you haven't spoken yet, so I'll give you the chance to motivate.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for the opportunity to address this. And I just want to begin by actually thanking the applicant, Large & Co., for persevering with this beautiful multifamily housing project and bringing it back to council. I have moved the motion as presented by staff, which suggests that we move forward with information provided to the public about this, an opportunity for them to respond to us, but without a public hearing. I believe that any further delay to this project that would be taken by a public hearing simply adds to the cost of realizing this very much needed housing in our community. Last year, when I ran for a seat in this council, I did so primarily because of my concern that we were not doing enough to address the growing housing need in our community. And in April, I actually went on the public record with my dismay and disappointment after the previous council rejected a previous iteration of this project in March of 2022. As I stated then, in addition to providing the then 14 and now 15 units of reasonably sized, actually quite generously sized housing, this beautiful building ticks all the right boxes for our community and is in perfect alignment with our priorities and the OCP, supporting our objectives to create a compact, walkable and bikeable community and ensure the vibrancy of our village centre. It has received, for the second time now, resounding approval from both our Advisory Design Panel and the Advisory Planning Commission. Our own 2020 Housing Needs Report indicates a pent-up demand of 647 units of all types of housing for Oak Bay. I fully expect that the housing targets that will be set for us by the province will meet or exceed this number. We must say a resounding yes to this project if we are to have any hope of meeting our housing obligations. This building, thank you, architect and developer, fits very elegantly into the street and will enhance Oak Bay Avenue in so many ways. Although the units will not be affordable to households below a certain income in Greater Victoria, they will be both affordable and attractive to many other families, both existing residents of Oak Bay who wish to downsize and stay in our community, and those we need to attract to staff our hospitals, schools, and other essential services. While our infill housing strategy and program to incentivize secondary suites will bring other forms of smaller scale housing into the community, we also desperately need apartment form buildings. There is no better time or place, in my view, for this project, and I am so very grateful that the applicant has stayed the course to bring this back to us for consideration and hopefully approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. I'm just going to remind us all as we're making our comments that we are, should this go to a public hearing process, that we are obligated by law to have an open mind and listen to things. So I just appreciate the passion of that comment, but I also want to remind us all that we are obligated to actually keep an open mind up until the end point of that decision-making process. So as we make our comments. Next, I have Councillor Braithwaite.
Thanks so much, Mayor. I really wish I could support this. However, I do think that we should go to public hearing. I do agree that we need densification. This is a perfect spot for densification on the avenue. I don't know whether this is the right building for this site. I want to hear from the public as to whether it is or not. There are a few concerns that I think have been raised in some of the letters. You know, to me, it doesn't hurt us to let the public come in and weigh in on a bigger scale than just having letters go to people that are within 50 meters. You know, is this the right size for this lot? Is this the right massing? Do they want surface parking? Do they want underground parking? All of those things. Maybe we can do something better. You know, I mean, do we need densification? Absolutely. And are we for densification? Absolutely. We, as you have said, Councillor Watson, we are, in our housing strategy, we know we want to get 648 new units within the next period of time. We need to do that. I don't know whether this is the right building. I want to hear from people in the community as to whether or not they think this is the right building. So I would like to see it go to public hearing. I hate the fact that I have to vote against this motion, but I'm going to vote against it because I would like to then, if it is defeated, I would like to then put a motion on the table that we would go to public hearing.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Just a couple of quick things on that. For clarification of process, either one of these processes does allow for public input, and there will be notifications attached to it. Just oddly enough, because of our procedures bylaw, they both will have a very similar type of public input piece of it. One would be at a council meeting, one would be at a public hearing. There's pros and cons to both. Maybe I'll take a moment and staff can correct me if I'm wrong on this stuff, but the motion that's on the floor right now would essentially direct us to have a meeting in which the public could speak to us before we consider first, second, and third reading. But it wouldn't have the structure of a public hearing, and whereas the public hearing has legislative guidelines for essentially that lays out a process to ensure that there's fairness and pieces, we can still achieve those either way. And because they are both very similar in that we don't have time constraints on our public input, they would effectively have the same public input process on those two things. I will say for the record, I prefer a public hearing because I think until we work out our own internal processes, it's actually going to be quicker and cleaner doing it through the public hearing process. But that's my own personal take of this. It's so just for the record, it's not a question of public input or not public input. They're just slight variations of the two.
And thank you for that clarification. But at the same time, if we do get public input in the way that it's put forward right now, can we then go back to the proponent before first, second, and third reading to have changes made to the proposal?
So I may turn to staff just to confirm my comments here, but the short answer is yes. We can at any point refer this back and ask for changes before adopt or we make first, second, and third reading. If we do public hearing, we do first and second reading, then we have a public hearing. So we could do that tonight, first and second reading. We can then go to the public hearing. Based on that, we could go back and rescind public second reading and do those changes. Either way, we have the option of changing post-public input. But Mr. Green, anything else you wish to add to that?
Through the chair, no, that's correct. Essentially what the intent of the new legislation is to essentially bring that public hearing forward, or the opportunity for public input earlier in the process. So we would still do the same notification letters. We would still put 2 adverts in the paper, which would be the same as advertising for a public hearing. It's just that we will be writing to people and putting adverts in the paper saying that council is consideration giving first reading, rather than that the district is holding a public reading after having already given first and second reading of the bylaw.
Thank you for that. Anything else, Councillor? Thank you. Councillor Patterson? Oh, sorry, I had Councillor Appleton on my list first and then Councillor Patterson. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton. Oh, sure, point of clarification is in order. Go ahead, Councillor
Yeah, just a
Patterson.
point of clarification on what the information staff just gave. Is there a difference in the timing of processing the application if we do it as proposed and we give public a voice between the second and third reading, or if we actually have to go to a public hearing first? Does it delay the process significantly?
Mr. Green? I guess it depends on whether or not we do for first and second reading tonight versus a future first and second reading.
Through the chair, I guess it would depend on if when council gives first and second reading, and then council, because my understanding that council must schedule a public hearing rather than directing staff to schedule that public hearing. So I guess it would depend on when first and second reading would happen, whether first and second reading would happen on the same evening as the public hearing, for example, that sometimes happen in some municipalities. Or whether first and second reading would happen at a subsequent council meeting, and then council schedule a public hearing for a later date, and then need to ensure that there's enough time to advertise that public hearing and give notice of that public hearing. So I'm not sure if others in the team had anything to comment on that.
Mr. Coates?
Your worship, members of council, I think, for the most part, I think Mr. Green's represented the timing of the process well. I think essentially they're similar, and it really does, as he indicated, come down to if council gave 2 readings to the bylaw tonight and scheduled a public hearing. I think we'd be in the same time frame as if the bylaw comes back to council in 2 weeks for consideration for second and third reading, because we've still got a couple of meetings to deal with. And but if council chose to give 2 readings to the bylaw in 2 weeks and schedule a public hearing, that would be a longer time period than the other.
So I think maybe a little bit of context here is helpful as well, because there's been staff changeover and council turnover back about beginning of the last term, so about 4 years ago. Council undertook changes to our procedures bylaw and land use application process quite intentionally to try and get to this point quicker and get to public hearing so that we weren't delaying that. So in many ways, trying to streamline this process in a way that actually is the same impact as, because what we found was that we were having sort of partial public consultation midway through the process, and we thought we wanted to make sure we got to this point where we came here. If it had enough validation to go and hear from the public, we would quickly go to that process and not delay it. So one of the reasons this is sort of similar in timeline outputs is that we've intentionally tried to do that, but really that relies on us either doing first and second reading tonight, going to public hearing to hear input, or under the new provincial allowance, essentially saying we're going to do this, the public piece at prior to first reading. At the end of the day, Mr. Coates, I believe you're correct. If we were to say not do the first and second reading, then that would delay it by at least 2 weeks, as would a deferral of this discussion until next 2 weeks, and have the same essentially effect. So hope that's clear as mud. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. So I'm supporting the motion on the floor, and I'm happy to see it moving forward in this format in terms of the breakdown of public consultation that you've just laid out and you've just described for the members of the public. This was, to my mind, the intention of us adjusting our procedures bylaw, and not the waiving of the public hearing, but the alternative process to going to a public hearing hinges very clearly on whether or not something is compatible with the OCP. And in this particular case, in my estimation, this is much needed housing in a location which not only aligns with the OCP, but is actually a fairly rare location in Oak Bay, where we have the opportunity to do infill development, multi-unit development on OCP designated for that. It will require rezoning, but the OCP does identify this specific area, as was described in the staff presentation, for multi-unit housing. We have intentionality in our OCP to put infill developments close to amenities and close to transit. This is the appropriate location, as the OCP would call for it. We have intentionality in the OCP to retain green space and to have that green community, the design that people favor and people appreciate about Oak Bay, and the design of this with its underground parking and with its surface, with the lack of surface parking, with the underground parking and the surface landscaping, I think addresses that intentionality in the OCP. We have OCP intentions and council strategic direction to provide options and diversity of housing options. Again, there are not very many opportunities immediately at hand for us to provide this type of option in Oak Bay. So I believe it aligns closely with the OCP there. It's an opportunity for people in the community looking to downsize, providing other options for people who might purchase and move into those single family homes that become available. I do believe that this is a desirable option for people downsizing within Oak Bay and gives people an opportunity to stay in Oak Bay that might have been here for some time. And then also Council's recent discussion about adaptability and accessibility provisions. The adaptable units also speaks to this as well. So I think that that's a welcome addition. So what I'm seeing is that, you know, I hear the concerns being raised. I know that this is a not an insignificant size proposal. I do see a developer responding to concerns and adapting design and doing an iterative process of responding to that. And there is going to be an opportunity, as you've described, Your Worship, for public input throughout this process. So I see a development here which is very much in alignment with the OCP and what we seek to achieve through the policy direction of the OCP. So I'm in support of it moving forward in the way described in the staff recommendation. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you very much, Councillor Appleton. Councillor Green, you're unmuted. Did you wish to speak?
Thank you very much, and I appreciate all of the comments that have been made tonight. I also appreciate the developer making changes based on last year's application. I really appreciate that. I appreciate the comments of my colleagues as well. I too, though, would prefer a public hearing, a formal public hearing on this application, only because we have been overwhelmed with feedback, and none of it really is conclusive in the sense that we have heard from those who support this proposal unequivocally and those who do not. And so my sense is that a public hearing would at least give the public a chance to voice those concerns together, those for and against the proposal. And I believe that's probably the most balanced and fairest approach at this stage. I also respect that the staff have spent a lot of time preparing the report. It's very comprehensive, and I appreciate tonight that the proponent and his team are here. I really appreciate that. This is a really difficult one, and it has been for some time. It has stirred controversy. It has stirred media attention. And it's been unfortunate because instead of unifying our community around housing, this particular proposal has tended to be more divisive. So I'm hoping it will be more of a unifying experience, and I think a public hearing would demonstrate that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Green. I have Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mayor. I am on side with the recommendation that has been proposed because it does still allow for a public voice in this process. We have come to this development several times in the past, and I think that we can agree probably that it is not maybe a perfect fit for the site. However, I do think through the process that we have undergone the last couple of go-rounds, what we have achieved now is a building that is more sustainable, that gives us some adaptable housing in the community. But this is still a luxury building that requires parking on a route that is directly adjacent to public transportation and within walking distance of the village. And so it is not responsive to the OCP on those items. However, I think that it has moved forward sufficiently, at least in my opinion, on the sustainability and adaptability issues that are needed in this community to move it forward as recommended by staff. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess I'm the last to speak on this, which is normal. Interestingly, I came here tonight ready to fight to make sure that we got it to a public hearing, to make sure that we heard from the public. I thought last time around it deserved, I don't think I spoke eloquently enough to articulate the fact that we changed our process to make sure we heard from the public and to make our decision with public input. So I'm happy to hear that take seems to be around the table, that we want to hear from the public on it. I felt quite strongly coming into this meeting that public hearing was the preferred model. I still believe that. That being said, I've also heard from the comments around the table about the and the timelines being roughly equivalent. That this may be in given that this is a thing on the floor. I'm not going to fight. I think that the alternate approach taken here is as long as it achieves the goal of an open meeting where everybody has a voice. And we can hear that voice and give direction based on that, or request changes based on that feedback, then we're achieving the goals that we're setting out here. So I thought quite clearly in my mind coming into this meeting that I was going to fight for the public hearing. I just want people to understand that it's the same equivalent that we're looking at. We're looking at a way of hearing from the public to inform our decision making. And I'm glad to hear that it sounds like that's the will of the council as well, to at least move it forward to public consultation. I will speak more broadly to the application. And I really did appreciate the time you took, Mr. Dumont, on some of the answers to the questions on the FAR and the explanations of the parking and the constraints of the difficulty there. I think it's important for us to recognize it's very rare we get a perfect site with the perfect piece and everything lines up where it just kind of fits into there's like two Lego pieces that just match. It doesn't happen very often, and this is one of the tough ones. And I don't want to belittle the fact that it's going to be a significantly sized building on a single family lot that's adjacent to other single family homes, and it has an impact. There's going to be impacts of the build. There's other pieces. I do want to compliment the applicant on what is really a very beautiful design. I think it's done everything it can to create visual lines and a sense of reduced massing on what is again a very tight space and not always easy to do. So I do want to thank the applicants for doing that. I think that, as others have said here, we're in a tough space here as well, in that we don't have a lot of land in Oak Bay. We just don't. We're looking at our housing needs and other pieces and how we can move things forward, and there's just so few pieces of property that we can build on that are appropriate for multifamily buildings. And I think we have to take these applications when they come forward to us very seriously and look at them and look at them with that lens of, are these is there anything bad enough here to stop this from going forward, or is the scale of it appropriate? And I think that's ultimately going to be the question for council: is the scale appropriate for the site? And I think a lot of the questions that you've answered here tonight in terms of the why things are built the way they are is helpful. Ultimately, council is going to have to make the decision about whether that fits or not. So I'll be supportive of the motion that's on the floor. I think that achieves my concerns, which is public input and timing, in a way that still allows for good discussion. Sorry, Councillor Braithwaite, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And I think that hearing your explanation and also coming here thinking really I wanted this to have a lot more public input, but hearing your explanation of what the process will be, I will actually change my mind and support it moving forward right now, because I'm confident that we're going to get enough public input from the process that we're going to put in place. So I will vote for it moving forward at this time.
Thank you very much, Councillor Braithwaite. Councillor Green?
Mayor?
Yes, go ahead, Councillor Green.
Oh, I'm sorry. Am I interrupting the flow, or?
No, you're good. Go ahead. You're in an awkward spot with the thing. You can.
I know. I can't. There's a lag. I'm watching you, but I know there's a lag. I just quickly wanted to ask for clarity. If staff, through you, could explain clearly for the public the difference between the public consultation processes that they're used to. So they're used to hearing about and relating to a public hearing. So I just wondered if staff could articulate the current process, that there is going to be public consultation on this application. It just isn't called a public hearing. So I wondered if that could be clarified, just to ensure that everyone is on the same page on public input. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Bull.
Thank you. Through you, I'll explain it in slightly different words, but in both options there is an advertisement required. So if a hearing is held, an advertisement announces where the hearing is. If there's no hearing, an advertisement will tell everybody, well, there's a proposal, there will not be a hearing. Council is considering that day. And because of our council procedures, we will have public input at that council meeting if there's no hearing or there would be a hearing. So that's kind of very similar. Both get notification the same way. And in the one case, without a hearing, there's input at the council meeting or there's input at the public hearing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I think the bottom line here is that there will be public input regardless. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm still not entirely sold on this new process, I will say. I just, for those who aren't familiar with the public hearing process versus others, the parts of the public hearing that I think are really helpful are just the structured input that comes from the public in terms of, everybody is guaranteed to have an appropriate amount of time to speak. And we also have very clear cutoffs and so forth for receiving information. So if a meeting ends and we need to go away and think about things, there isn't sort of a dribble of additional information coming in. Everybody gets a chance at one spot to have that piece. So there are real pluses to the public hearing system. But I think in this case we can certainly. I promise I will run a meeting that allows for a fulsome of input onto those pieces. So I'm supportive of the motion on the floor. I don't see other hands popping up. So I'm going to call the question on the motion, which all those in favor? Councillor Green?
Yes.
Okay, that motion carries. So procedurally here, a meeting coming up. The advertising will start ASAP, I'm guessing, and we'll be scheduling a meeting in the near future for this to come back before council. Do we know what that date is at this time?
Yes, through the chair, it's likely to be October the 10th, Tuesday, October the 10th, given that I've got to draft an advert for 2 editions of the Oak Bay News, as well as draft a letter to send out to all the property owners and tenants within 50 metres. So I don't think we'll be able to make that September 25th, because essentially you'd have to get that advert drafted tomorrow morning, and we've got 4 DVBs that we've got to get the letters
For all
out
those
for.
watching who are interested, October the 10th is
Yes.
the expected date
Yes.
at this point.
I
Okay,
think that's more
thank you.
realistic time than September 25th. I think it's just too tight to get to September 25th. And I think October 10th will just give us that time to ensure that advert goes in those 2 editions, as well as the letters go out in an appropriate time to give more people more time to respond as well.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Mayor. Oh,
yes.
sorry.
Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Yes, I just wanted to, if I may, make a suggestion that we also advertise this on the website. This has been a high-profile application and high-profile process, so I hope that we can advertise that date on the website as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we often go things through our social media and so forth as well to make sure people are aware. We don't want people going, I never heard about it, which seems to always be one after these things. I think that concludes this item on the agenda. I have us as a little bit behind our my intended schedule, but not too far. If any people want to leave right now after that, you're more than welcome to. We're going to move on to the next item on the agenda, which doesn't have public input, so we're just going to move through them. Upland Siting and Design for 3260 Uplands Place. Mr. Muller, welcome to the meeting. You came in a little early there. You obviously anticipated us being quicker than we were.
That's right. Mayor, Council, thank you. The District of Oak Bay has received an upland siting design application for the property located at 3260 Uplands Place. I'll just wait a moment for that.
Sure. Oh, you can go ahead, because
okay.
At home they can hear
Perfect.
clearly.
The roughly 2,900 square meter property zoned R2 contains a single-family home and a below-grade accessory building built in 1962. The applicant is proposing removing the existing single-family home and accessory building and to construct a new 807 square meter, or roughly 8,900 square foot, 2-story single-family home. As the property is located within the uplands, a review of the proposed works and for conformance with the OCP and the uplands regulation bylaw was conducted by staff, and recommendations from the ADP are brought forth to council today for your considerations. The ADP provided their recommendation for the approval with the motion stating that the plans should be updated to include the solar panels mentioned in their project rationale, but at that time were not reflected in the plans. The applicant has revised their drawings to include the solar panels, and these revisions are in the plans attached to the report. Should you choose to approve the application, the applicant would need to obtain a tree removal permit for the proposed removal of 5 bylaw protected trees and the necessary building permits.
Thank you very much, Mr. Muller, and I believe we have Mr. Hardcastle here as well. Thank you. From Hill Architecture. Should there be any questions? Are there any questions of staff or the applicant on the upland siting and design for this project? Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Oh, thank you. Through you, Mayor. Could you just clarify which page has the solar panels on it? Maybe this will be a question for the architect. I don't have the exact number in front of me. One moment.
Through the chair, page 238 of the council agenda shows the location of those panels.
Do you know their position of the, oh, maybe that's helpful. We have broken down by report, so do you know the page on this particular report? Well, I think I see them on page, yeah, site planning for solar is on page 14 of 37.
Thank you for that.
Councillor Smart, do you have that? That's sufficient? Any other questions for the applicant or staff? Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, probably a question to the applicant. When I review, there's a number of bylaw protected trees, Gary oaks, that need to be removed on this site. And when I review the site plan, again, and I've raised this concern about site plans before in terms of removals. In my view, the site plans really need to show in quite some detail where the trees to be removed are. I'm seeing that a number of trees are to be removed for the driveway access at the southeastern side of the property, off of the to facilitate the access. And I'm just wondering, can we hear from the applicant as to why this particular design was selected, and what rationale we would have for supporting the expanded driveway design that necessitates the removal of Gary oaks?
Mr. Hilla, welcome.
Good afternoon. Yes, I will gladly walk you through the process. The process of designing the residence removed both an underground in-ground pool and an accessory building and a primary residence. And the end result in the canopy exposure, the canopy opening that was there, the building was entirely designed to fit within that natural canopy opening to as much as possible maintain the Jerry oaks on the property. The end result is going to be 54% site coverage for those tree canopies, which is above the 45% required. So we do end up with more trees in the future. We are planting Jerry oaks in exchange for some of those Jerry oaks removed. And as we try to maintain some of those trees, we've taken a great deal of a pride and time of actually driving vehicles around Jerry oaks so that open meadow in the front of the property will remain. There'll be open Jerry oaks surrounded by plantings and a natural Jerry oak meadow, and we'll be driving around it. Unfortunately, there are some trees being lost in that process, and unfortunately, both in the driveway and the building. But the end result will be more Jerry oaks on the property, not in the front of the property, but in the back of the property where they will have a chance to flourish, where they will have adequate water to enable them to grow healthy and perhaps far better than in the front of the property. Confident that we tried as much as we could to save as many trees as we could. It is a very substantial home. The home is a multi-generational home. It also accommodates 2 home businesses. Vehicles for those businesses, there is a competitive cyclist in the family, and that is now extending from her role as a mom to her kids as well. So there is a multiple needs for garages and other things. Makes it a big floor plate. But the effort we all put in to save as many trees as we possibly could, and the effort to turn vehicles around those Jerry oaks in the front of the property to maintain as many as we could. Proud of that effort. I don't think we could have done more.
Thank you for the answer. I apologize. I called you Mr. Hill, but of course, Mr. Hardcastle, I was glancing down and looking at the wrong name. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Just a follow up from you or through you to the applicant. So we're specifically referring to Gary Oaks here, and I guess I take a little bit of a different view. I see an expanded. It's basically a driveway surface that's expanded to the southwest side, basically to more or less the full extent that it can be. And I see a chunk of this driveway which proceeds immediately northbound from there. There's a loop style driveway here with an element to the southwest that is quite extensive. So again, I'll sort of phrase the same question again. Is there a design alteration that can be achieved on that southwestern corner of the driveway in order to retain those trees, or is this a design? Is this a design choice?
Mr. Hardcastle?
I don't think there was an easy way for us to save even one more tree. It was an extensive effort to have vehicles turning around in this driveway, including vehicles that pull a trailer into the property. The looping of the drive to allow vehicles to turn around and then exit the property facing forward was a decision based on the function of vehicles entering the property with a trailer and then leaving the property with the least disturbance. I can say, unfortunately, but with confidence, that we did try to save every possible tree we could.
Councillor Appleton? Anything else? Any other
No,
questions?
thank you, Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Councillor Green, I'm just going to reach out to you because you're unmuted at the moment, and I just want to make sure you don't have any questions.
No, I think Councillor Appleton has covered what I was concerned about and remain concerned about. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions from members of council? I don't have any questions on this one. We have a motion to receive the report. Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussion on receipt? All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed?
Yes.
And then really we have an upland setting and design application for recommendation of approval. Go ahead.
I'm willing to make the motion recommended by staff.
Moved. Is there a seconder? Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any further discussion on this? Go ahead, Councillor Smart.
Yeah, I'll just mention that, well, I do very much appreciate the comments by my colleagues around the tree loss. I do feel like there is a gain in emphasizing an even greater park-like setting with the orientation of the driveway to the side, and I appreciate that the applicant and the designer haven't gone with perhaps the easy route of putting the garage straight ahead in the cul-de-sac and having a straight driveway in, which wouldn't have been in keeping with the Uplands design guidelines. So I do see a benefit to the design when I look at that in comparison with the guidelines. And when I look at the overall tree canopy for the entire site, I feel confident that it still meets the park-like setting.
Thank you, Councillor Smart. Go ahead, Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Worship. So I would speak against the motion that's on the floor. So I'm not in support of the design as it is. Mature Gary Oaks are hard to come by. Mature Gary Oaks define the community, and mature Gary Oaks take a very long time to achieve the size that they get to. So, we have specifications to replace tree canopy on lots for a reason. But mature Gary Oaks are very unique and special to our district, and we value them. And as such, we place the emphasis on them that we do in our tree protection bylaw. This is a very large floor plate of a home on a comparatively small lot by upland standards. And I believe that there are ways to, I have heard that there's an intentionality to create a circular driveway for functional aspects that the potential builders would look to achieve. I believe that we can specify a different design or specify a different direction that accomplishes retaining those trees while still gaining perfectly good access to that home. So the very large floor plate, the very large paved area, the very large driveway access area is creating this, in part, this issue causing these removals. And so I can't support it in its current form. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
Yes, Mayor, and thank you. I also don't support the application as it's shown for many of the same reasons that Councillor Appleton has already stated. The residence is very large. The lot is located on a very low traffic cul-de-sac. And while the driveway as it's shown, I have no doubt provides ease of functionality for vehicles, I think that it doesn't, in fact, keep with the uplands design intent of the parkland atmosphere, because it provides a massive amount of paved area at the front of a property on a very small cul-de-sac. And I think that there could be better options for designing a layout that might lose a little of the functionality, but would certainly preserve a lot more of the Gary Oak landscaping in uplands.
Thank you, Councillor Patterson. Go ahead, Councillor Braithwaite.
Thanks, Mayor. A question to staff. If this was not to be moved forward tonight, what would the process be for the applicant? Would they have to wait a certain period of time to come back? Or if they were just going to if we asked for a slight change on the driveway area, would they be able to come back in a shorter period of time?
Mr. Bull?
Yeah, through the Mayor, there's two options here. If the application gets rejected today, then it needs to be made anew. But if it sounds like maybe there's an interest on council to request changes, then it would be better to ask for those changes for a motion. And then that would allow the application to return with an updated plan.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so thank you for that, because I mean, I do have a concern as well as, along with Councillor Patterson and Councillor Appleton, in regards to the trees that are being removed. And I do wonder if there could be a little bit of a tweak in that design of that driveway that could perhaps save at least 2 of those trees. I understand that you can't save the 1, 2, 3, 4, I believe, that are within the building envelope, but there's 2 on the side of the driveway that perhaps could be saved, and that, that maybe is a question to the applicant. Is there some way that could be tweaked a little bit, where those 2 trees along the driveway beside the hedge, it looks like a hedge, might be grass, could be saved?
I think Mr. Hardcastle already kind of answered from his perspective, but go ahead, Mr. Hardcastle, if you wish.
Yes, the entranceway to those garages is from the front, so...
Oh, can you use the microphone, please? My apologies.
Thank you. The question is a good one. Can we put in additional efforts and in any way save 1 Jerry oak tree, 2 Jerry oak trees? I can only say that it was certainly our purpose to do so, entering the garage from the front. Perhaps it could be reconsidered, and it's a design change to enter the garage in another manner in order to save a Jerry oak tree. It is a home that is custom designed for the particular clients. It is not a speculative home, so their vehicle needs and the turning radius of their vehicle and their trailers, we tried everything we could. I'll happily take direction from council to take another look to see what we could do with the client's interest in mind, to see whether or not we can save even 1 more Jerry oak tree. We did try. We're happy to take direction to do so more.
Thank you. At this point, we have a motion on the floor for approval. I think if this motion fails, we would probably take a stab at giving some clear direction to give something to come back with those pieces. But at this point, that motion is on the floor. Any other discussion on this? I'll briefly say I'm going to support the motion that's on the floor. I do hear what the applicant has said about listening to the owners and what their specific needs are. It's not unusual we get odd houses for very specific needs, and I think that adds to the positive and eclectic nature of our community. But it is hard to see any trees come down. I also appreciate that having new ones planted in a healthy way is also very helpful. So we're getting some new stock coming in to replace those, as they will hit end of life at some point. Anyway, those are my thoughts on it. But if it does fail, then we will come back and seek a very specific direction going forward. Right now, the motion is on the floor to approve. So motion in favor obviously concludes this, and if it is declined, then we would come back for some further direction. I will call the question. All those in favor of the motion? And those opposed?
I'm opposed.
Councillor Patterson, Councillor Appleton, Councillor Green opposed. That motion carries. So the setting and design is approved. Good luck with the new home. And maybe you can find some little secret way of saving some of those as you go forward. So thank you. We have next 7.3 development variance permit. So this is a different process for anybody watching. Development variance permits, or DVPs as we call them, basically come to this table. This process is changing if the bylaws later in this meeting pass, but currently they come to us first to have a look at. If we see it has enough merit for consideration, we send it out for public input, and it comes back to this table. Mr. Muller, I believe this goes back to you.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. The District of Oak Bay has received a development variance permit for the application for the property at 2240 Kinross. The roughly 7,500 square meter property, zoned R5, has a single-family home built in 1952. In May of 2022, the district issued the applicant a building permit for a kitchen and basement renovations. During the inspection, it was noted that the wall separating the covered parking area from the living space had been removed, and the parking area had been converted into basement. As such, the applicant is requesting a variance to relax the requirement for half of their parking being located within a building or covered. The applicant is proposing to locate both their parking spaces on the driveway in front of the building. The application before you today is before you today to receive, as you mentioned, notification as per the land use procedure bylaw. If council should approve this application for notice, staff would mail out to all properties within a 50-meter radius of the subject property. And after the mandatory 10-day period, staff will compile any public input received and append it to the report and bring it forth to the council at the next available meeting.
Thank you, Mr. Muller. Are there any questions of staff or the applicant at this time? This is what we call a straightforward one.
Proceed.
So move receipt of the report. Is there a seconder? Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed?
I'll move the staff recommendation for DVP 00139 be approved.
That notice be given.
Notice be given, yep.
Is there a seconder? Seconded. Thank
I'll
you.
second.
Is there any further discussion on this item? Are the applicants here tonight?
Patrick Harris is in the
okay.
waiting room.
Very good.
Hello.
Hi, I don't think we have any questions for you at this point, so I just checking to see if there was any, that there was someone here to direct them to. Not seeing any, I am ready to call the question then. All those, for Councillor Watson, we're just giving motion to give notice here, Councillor Watson. You get to participate in this vote. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? Notice will be given, and that'll come back to us, I'm assuming, in the beginning of October, or is it the 25th?
October 10th, correct. Yeah.
Oh, sorry, through the chair, we're trying to get these DVPs to the September 25th meeting,
Okay.
so we have already drafted the letters, and so we have organised to get these letters out to enable us to meet that September 25th.
Great,
which
thank
will
you.
then hopefully have a freer agenda on October 10th.
Perfect. Then 7.4, we have another DVP for 2649 Thompson Avenue. Mr. Muller, you're on stage today.
264. The District of Oak Bay has received a development permit application for the property located at 2649 Thompson. The roughly 1,000 square meter property zoned R5 contains a split-level single-style family home, an accessory building built in 1944, and an interconnected addition built in 1969. The siting of the single-family home on the property is non-conforming as it predated the current zoning bylaw and resulting in a non-conforming front yard setback. The applicant is proposing the renovation, conversion, and construction of the existing single-family home and attached garage to create a secondary suite. As the covered parking will be converted into secondary suite, an additional variance will be needed to relax the requirement for half of the covered parking being located within inside a building. allowing both stalls to be located in the proposed driveway out in front of the primary residence. This application is before you today to receive approval for notification as per the land use procedure bylaw. If council should approve this application for notification, staff will send out notification to all properties within a 50-meter radius of the subject property. And after the mandatory 10-day period, staff will compile any public input received and append it to this report and bring it back to council for your review.
Thank you very much, Mr. Muller. I see Mr. Wilkins here in the audience. I think this is your applicator you're representing here. Is that correct? Oh, the whole family's here. Very good. So we have lots of people to answer questions if there are any questions. That being said, again, I think this is a fairly straightforward and well laid out report.
Move receipt.
Moved. Is there a seconder? Let's deal with receipt first. Moved and seconded. Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? That carries. We then have this.
I'll move. Yeah.
I'm just going to give people a chance to ask any questions before we get to motions. I don't want to cut people off if there are any. I don't see any. Very good.
I'll move development variance.
We can go. We can move it. It's fine. We can still have questions.
I'll move development variance permit DVP 00132 for the property located at 2649 Thompson Avenue.
Moved. Is there a seconder? Seconded. Thank you. Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And just a question for staff. It does, this is referenced as a secondary, an application for secondary suite. In the letter that accompanied this, it said the secondary suite for the family will be located partly in the lower level of the existing house and partly in the two-story addition. That wasn't that clear to me in looking at the plans, how the separation is achieved so that we in fact have a totally separate secondary suite.
Maybe I'll let the applicant speak to the design rationale behind that.
Mr. Wilkins, why don't you come forward? If you just state your name, or municipality of residence or business address or your call, and then just a quick answer to the question.
Good evening. I'm Bruce Wilkin. I live in Oak Bay. Good evening. Personally, I'd like to say I'm really happy to be here and have an application in front of council for a secondary suite. I didn't think I'd make it to this point. So here we are. But to explain the suite, the parents, the idea here is to create housing for a family. So Graham and Becky are behind me and their daughter. So the daughter and her family are going to live in one suite, and then the parents are going to live in another suite. So the suite for the parents is basically the existing main floor of the old house. But to create enough bedrooms for the children, there's 2 children as well, is to have the addition of 2 stories and then part of the basement, which becomes the children's bedrooms in the second suite. So it's kind of they're not connected, but they're kind of like Jenga connected. So hard to explain it, but it's fairly complicated how we were able to create this and meet the requirements of the zoning bylaw for floor space ratio and site coverage. Does that answer your question?
Thank you, Mayor. And you know, it somewhat explains it. I'm still having difficulty in quite envisioning the separation walls, but I will trust to the design and the building staff to ensure that we meet all of the requirements
Mr.
for
Mullen
an
and I
actual
worked
secondary
quite hard to bring this to fruition, but we got there.
Thank you, Mr. Wilkins. I have Councillor Appleton. You have a question?
Thank you, Your Worship. It's a good segue just to pick up on what the applicant had just said, because I just wanted to, speaking in support of the motion on the floor, I just wanted to compliment the applicant and compliment the designer on coming up with a really interesting sort of crafty reuse of an existing single-family home to add additional housing and additional space into it. And I think when to my mind, when council contemplated secondary suite options and having this type of thing take place, this was the type of reuse that I think we really wanted to see. So this is a really great adaptive reuse for a multi-family environment into a single-family lot. So I'm encouraged by this, and I would certainly be hopeful to see more. Thank you, Your Worship.
Go ahead, Councillor Watson.
Thank you. Yes, I'll also be supporting the motion. And I just wanted to make one observation really to my council colleagues and to say that this application would not actually be possible had our secondary suites bylaw required an additional parking space for a secondary suite. So it is just wonderful that we the council made the decision it did to remove the parking requirement, the additional parking requirement for a secondary suite, or we would not be getting options like this in front of us. So thank you, applicant. And it's just really an observation about what we now have in front of us as a result of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Watson. I'm just going to throw it out there.
I'm there.
Yeah, go ahead, Councillor Green.
I'm sorry, I can see you, but I know there's a lag, and I'm not sure in what order you're going. I hate to interrupt the flow.
You can hit *9 on your phone at any time, and that raises your hand on my screen, so if that helps. And *9 again to lower it.
I've been hitting so many buttons tonight that I'm afraid to hit anything now. I just wanted to make a comment. I would like to echo the compliments of my colleagues for this application. It's exactly what was intended for secondary suites, and I'm really, and I appreciate Councillor Watson's comments, because I personally fought long and hard not to have parking, you will recall, for secondary suites. And so I'm very glad to see that that this application is before us, and that parking requirement was ultimately dropped. And I think that allows much more creativity, and this is a creative application, and I appreciate it, and I do commend the applicants and their team. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we'll just leave it there. I was just going to say the point that was the previous iteration of that proposal was to require some covered parking for e-bikes to get a delegated variance for that. So it wasn't like there was a massive ask for parking in the previous version, but I do appreciate it. Does certainly simplify the application process on this. So with that, I have a motion on the floor. I'm ready to call the question. Since there's nobody speaking against it, might as well go forward. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? That carries.
Yes.
Same timeline, I believe. The 25th will be the intended return date for this. The notification will go out tomorrow. So thank you. Yes. Thank you for your patience as you've sat through the meeting so far. We are moving on to item number 7.6, which is building planning development fees and charges bylaw 4845. I just want to point out these two 7.6 and 7.7 are linked, so I'm just going to take it. We don't usually have a lot of debate on adoption, but if there's anything that people wish to raise or make a point of on either one of these, did I miss something?
7.5 you missed. For people that are waiting for 7.5, I think.
My apologies.
2700 Dorset.
Sorry, I drew a line through it, so that was the problem. 7.5. Mr. Muller? My apologies.
No worries. The District of Oak Bay has received an upland siding design application for the property at 2700 Dorset. The roughly 1,000 square meter property zoned R2 contains a single-family home built in 1957. The applicant is proposing the construction of an accessory building to be used as a garage, exterior renovations in the form of facade upgrades, and the reduction of an existing deck into a rear door landing and replacement with a patio and various plantings. As the property is located with the uplands, a review of the proposed work for conformance with the OCP and the uplands regulation bylaw was conducted by staff, and recommendation from ADP is brought forth to council for consideration in this report. Subsequently, the applicant is seeking a variance to allow for the siting of their proposed accessory building and garage 1.5 meters from the rear landing of the primary residence, as opposed to the required 3-meter separation distance between all buildings. The application is before you today to receive approval for this notification as per the land use procedure bylaw. And if council should approve this application for notification, staff will send a mail out to all properties within a 50-meter radius of the subject property. And after the mandatory 10-day period, staff will compile any public input received and append it to this report and bring it forth to council for your review at the next available meeting.
Thank you very much, Mr. Muller. Are there any questions of staff or the applicant on this item? While I do think sometimes our reports are extra long, it is sometimes very nice just to have all the information at hand so we can kind of consider these things on one fell swoop. Want to have a motion to receive? Is there a seconder? Thank you. Seconded, moved and seconded. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed?
I'll move DVP 00137 and approval of upland siting and design application ADP 00160 for the property located at 2700 Dorset Road.
So just for clarification, this will be, we're basically giving notice, and of this, we won't be considering approval of the site upland setting and design until that DVP comes back because it's contingent upon it.
Correct.
Just so we're clear. And are there any other questions or comments from members of council on this application? It's an interesting lot with the front and the back. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed? That carries.
Yes.
Sorry, preemptive, no unopposed. Thank you, Councillor Green. I now move on to, I'm just going to make sure I don't forget anything now, 7.6, which is our the development fees bylaw for adoption, and then we also have the secondary one, which is 7.7. The two are linked, so I just want to make sure that we're not in a situation where we approve one and not the other. So if there's any, we've gone through first, second, third reading on these. We're looking for adoption. I just want to point out one quick thing. Heritage had a chance. We didn't, the development fees and charges bylaw, we took out the increases to heritage applications and referred it to Heritage Commission. I understand they have now given their recommendations, which actually does include some increases. So we wouldn't make the changes here tonight, but there's a willingness of council to consider those changes. What I'll do is we'll do the two adoptions, and then we can do a motion arising to direct staff to bring back changes to the heritage application fees to a future meeting so that we can consider those as a separate amendment. So procedurally, that's if that's the will of council. But just so you know that conversation did happen at the Heritage Commission, and we should probably consider those recommendations at some point. So with that, are there any additional comments on these two bylaws before I go to calling the questions? No. So can I get someone to read out the recommendation here for 7.6?
I move that planning, building, and development fees and charges bylaw number 4845/2023 be adopted.
Is there a seconder? Seconded. Councillor Smart, you put your hand up. Was that just to move it, or was it to comment?
I just wanted to clarify through you, Mayor, because I was in the Heritage meeting, and perhaps this is a question for staff through you. There weren't specific recommendations made by Heritage. There was a conversation, and does staff have enough information, or do they need some discussion at the council table would be the question.
Oh, thank you for that clarification. Mr. Green?
Yes, through the chair, yeah, the fees and charges were, fees and charges report and bylaw were referred to the Heritage Commission on September 5th. There wasn't a formal motion coming out of that commission in relation to those fees. They made some comments. They believe that the fees should be higher than they are. They also made some comments that, it's anecdotally that the fees seem like to be a big increase, given that there hasn't been some changes to those fees for about 8 years now, and therefore it does appear that there was a spike in those fees. But generally, they were, I would say, that there was more comments in relation to supporting increases to those heritage applications. That being said, they didn't make a formal motion, they didn't make a formal recommendation, and they didn't specify what the fees should be for a heritage alteration permit or a heritage revitalisation agreement application, which are the two applications that the Commission comment on, which are the two heritage application types.
Okay, thank you for that. I might make a different, well, why don't we deal with these adoptions, because it would be a separate piece anyway, but it may not make sense to do a motion arising. We may want to look at it a bit more fulsomely in the next round of fees and things, charges, considerations, but we'll come back to that after. Right now we have a motion on the floor, which is for adoption. Any other discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. We move to 7.7.
I'll move that development application procedures bylaw number 4844/2023 be adopted.
Moved and seconded.
Second.
Thank you. Any other discussion on that? Call the question then. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed. That carries. Interestingly, that just nullifies the process we just went through with the last 6 applications, which instead of it coming to us twice, it's just going to go out to notification if staff feel it has merit, and then it'll come to us for consideration. But there we go. We've got a last kick at the can before we make those changes. So that bylaw is now adopted. The last piece of any kind of significant business, now subject to public input, ironically, now that all of the public has left the building. But we have people online who may wish to address us on this. We have a covenant amendment application for 713 St. Patrick Street. Nice to see the developers working on that. I have to just say up front, it's coming together nicely. It's looking very, I know it's a long way from being finished, but you can really see the form of it now and what it's going to look like on the site. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about a covenant. I believe this is it Mr. Green? Welcome back again on this item, Mr. Green. You're busy tonight.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, so the application, the district has received a covenant amendment application requesting a change to a covenant that is registered on title for a property at 713 St. Patrick. Council may recall that this application was subject to a development permit back in 2022. 2021, I believe, but the covenant dates back to 2002 when there was a rezone application from the original property owner and property. The case is Delicatessen or retail store where they wanted to essentially start to sell deli items and open a small cafe within the building. So they went through a rezoning application where they rezoned the property from the C1 to the C2. But at the time, rather than providing the applicant of that rezone application the ability for all those uses, there was a covenant registered that specified that those uses could only apply to what the actual applicant had actually applied for, which was the ability to sell deli items within that store and the ability for patrons to sit down in that store to eat the sandwiches that they were purchased. So essentially, since that date, the current developer is building a mixed-use building comprising retail on the ground floor and 6 rental units above, and is now submitting an application given that they believe that the current covenant limits the potential of the site, particularly the retail ground floor story. And so the applicant is seeking to amend that covenant so that they can have both a broader range of uses, but specifically they do have interest from a local restaurant operator who would like to potentially look at that space as a restaurant, and currently that restrictive covenant does not allow the restaurant to take place. So there's a couple of asks from the applicant in relation to 3 specific sections that they would like to amend, which are sort of laid out in the staff report, and both staff and the applicant and the developer are also here to answer any questions that council may have on the application.
Thank you very much for that. And I'm just in the interest of keeping us moving on time here. And maybe this is the simplest question to ask. Is that we have 2 options here. One is to, as laid out here, and then the recommendation is to possibly assign some restrictions of specific uses, i.e. financial services, as part of that piece. The other, it's basically the 3 that are laid out here, plus those restrictions. The other option is to essentially, I would say, just add the 2D, which is to allow restaurant use to address the immediate short-term piece of this. I will say, I think if we're going to try and come up with a list of exclusions, that may be a little bit tough to do on the fly here tonight. So if you don't mind, I'm going to preempt this a little bit and just invite the applicants up to talk to us briefly. Just because it's far easiest for us to just amend the covenant to allow for restaurant use, if that's the will of council, if that's sufficient for what you need for now, as we might turn our minds a bit more to some of the corner commercial exclusions if we want to go down that path. And welcome back, Mr. Hardcastle.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council, again this evening. Yes, I could walk us through the proposal for making some amendments to the covenant that's currently registered on title. I would like to give you a brief history of where we have come from. As mentioned, in 2021, 713 St. Patrick Street was subject to a development permit. It wasn't a rezoning applications. It was strictly working with a few variances within the accepted C2 zone. That C2 zone actually does permit a restaurant at the moment. It is the covenant that is a slightly more restrictive document that is registered on title that limits that use. We have received, since the building has been under construction, multiple proposals to have a single business occupy the entire ground floor, which makes sense. It is a very small space. Every single one of those proposals for one tenancy, every single one of those proposals has been for a restaurant use. The covenant registered on property limits you to 10 chairs, 8 of which are permitted to be outside. So during the summer, if you have 8 people sitting outside, you are only permitted to have 2 people sitting inside. Even a coffee shop could not, under today's environment, operate with that covenant restricting the number of seats. It was put in place, as it was said earlier, 18 years ago on the property, and those restrictive covenants are placed to defend the community, to limit either what can take place on the property, when its operating hours might be. And reading through all of those clauses, there is no change requested to the hours of operation. There is no change requested to those already listed business potentials. It's only to add one more, which is the restaurant use. Interestingly enough, on that seating, one of the ideas is that to protect the public, if the purpose of the covenant was to place a restriction on how many chairs can be outside of a building, if that's really what we want a covenant to do to protect the public, then the design we have submitted and has always been there has respected those 8 seats outside. But it does only leave 2 seats inside. It is a very small space, and if it is merely edited in the manner that is proposed by the planning department, then it allows the building code requirements for calculating occupancy and washrooms to actually govern in that regards, but we could still maintain the seating count of 8 on the exterior of the building. One thing of concern, changing from a self-serve consumption of food products, which is currently permitted, somebody could actually pick up from a counter or anywhere throughout this area as much food as they wanted and go to a table and sit down, and that's permitted by zoning. But if they sit down first and a staff member comes over to invite them to select their food, that is not permitted by the restrictive covenant at the moment. So it's that definition between a restaurant and self-serve food facilities, which is really what we're talking about. Another layer of concern that you would all have is, what is the impact of parking on this? And the parking report that was prepared already anticipated a higher level demand from the parking than this sit-down, more formal restaurant. So one of those levels of concerns that you would obviously have has already been approved and is not going to be made worse in any way by this request. I do have permission to tell you who that tenancy is. And part of that description is fun to be an Oak Bay-based architectural firm and an Oak Bay resident who has designed this building. We have an Oak Bay owner, developer, and builder who is building the building, and we have an Oak Bay highly respected restaurateur willing to occupy the building. Currently a part owner in Octavio's. He is the owner of Ferris's Oyster Bar and has been for 32 years, and more recently Piero Negro. So this is a mature restaurateur, a mature business person who knows the limitations and potential of this opportunity to be here, is willing to enter into an agreement in principle with us. If we are successful, then we continue to go forward. And if not, all the individuals involved are happy to reconsider a business plan. It's not likely there's another opportunity that will work. We really want to see if we can make this possible for them. And the building is accommodating, has been designed in advance for this, as has the parking. But thank you.
Thank you very much. Given that, perhaps the specificity of the change in the covenant to include restaurants may be sufficient for the ask here, and simpler than us trying to go through a list of must not have a UPS store, must not have X. It seems like an awkward way of going about it. So thank you for that clarification, the specificity of it. We kind of preempted questions by having you give that piece, but it probably preempted some questions that we were going to have from the members of council. So are there any other questions that council has for the applicant? Don't see any. We have Councillor Green back on a video again. That's exciting. So with that, first let's need a motion to receive, I suppose, this report. Moved and seconded. Thank you. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed? Councillor Smart, you wanted to just, it's like you had to maybe have a question?
Well, I'm willing to move the motion as recommended with points 2 and 3, excluding point 1. And I could read that if for clarity.
So just for everybody, there's 3 recommendations
Oh,
here. Basically to
apologies.
strike.
Yeah.
So with I think what you're trying to do is strike the first recommendation, which is to read business as personal services. And so basically just add the new 2D and delete section 3. So that would remove the parking or the seating restrictions and add restaurant use.
And I would second that.
Yeah. So the motion is there on the screen. Are there any questions or comments on that motion? Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Yes, Mayor, it's Curry. Sorry, it's Councillor Green.
Go ahead, Councillor Green.
Yeah, I just have a couple of questions. I know at the time that we approved this project a few years ago, parking was considered and was not an overriding issue, but certainly an issue in some cases. It was not a sufficient concern, however, to halt the project, so it went forward, and I'm very glad it did. I supported this project from the get-go. Just a couple of questions on having a full-time restaurant with a liquor license. I'm just wondering, one, has there been any consideration given by the developer about the potential impact on the tenants above? Because I don't know what the plan is around the restaurant in terms of hours of operation, but is there any concern about potential impact on quality of life on the 6 suites above the restaurant? And 2, is there any concern about additional parking pressure? Now I heard the designer say that they don't anticipate a problem with parking for this restaurant, but I'm just wondering if adjacent neighbors are aware of this proposal and potential change. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Green. I'll let you answer the questions. Basically, the impact on the people living in the building, the parking, and then are the neighbors aware? Obviously, this is a public meeting. This is a public process with public input, but we don't advertise covenant changes in the way that we do with land use changes. So perhaps you can just touch on those 3 points, Mr.
Gladly. The building was always configured with the building uses according to both the covenant and the zoning, which means we always had a food facility, we always had a commercial kitchen below. There's an exceptional sound rating between the commercial property and those above, and because the building was considered for multiple uses, including retail use, mercantile use, those permitted business and personal services that are currently listed. All of those have their impacts minimized by how we've designed the building and the 2-hour fire separation between the restaurant below, which will also very effectively eliminate music from going up through the floor, the sound of it. The exterior canopy around the building is actually designed as an acoustic separation as well, so the conversation outside doesn't filter up through the outside of the building. So we have tempered the impact on the residences above for either a self-serve food facility or order some food and it will be served to you facility. Separate to that, the original parking assessment that was done by a professional engineer actually looked at multiple uses of the property. He took the highest worst-case scenario for parking and applied that over the entire ground floor, which makes sense as it is a smaller space. And because of that, there are uses that have a higher impact than a sit-down, more formal restaurant. So he has written a letter, which is a part of the package we submitted to planning, defending his report and saying actually what was already approved is well within the parking study that they undertook. And this would no doubt be a concern both to yourselves and to the neighbors. What is the impact of parking? And there is no impact that has not been considered, and it's not escalating in any way beyond what was originally approved. We have been approached by multiple interested parties leasing this. As if a party is going to sign an agreement, then this becomes a more public, more open document. We don't advertise who is interested in the property. It's rather a confidential thing as people are pursuing business locations. We have been approached by multiple restaurateurs for this property. We have an agreement in principle with the current one, which is allowing us to go forward with some confidence that if we had an acceptable outcome in this meeting, then we can go forward with a defined leaseholder.
Councillor Green, does that satisfy your questions?
Yeah, my only other question was around licensing, alcohol licensing. We do have another food provider nearby, which is Salish. I don't think they serve alcohol. I'm not absolutely sure. Are there any concerns around alcohol licensing in what is essentially a neighborhood node, a commercial node, which is quite different from, say, the Village, where there are other eateries and other alcohol outlets? So I just wondered if there was any concern about that. Thank you.
I might just turn the question around. Does the current C2 zoning with the exclusions of the covenant prevent alcohol service currently?
It does not. It defines restaurant use.
Okay. Mr. Bull,
Thank you.
Yeah, maybe to clarify, the distinction there in liquor licensing is between a liquor primary license or a food primary license.
Right.
And restaurants have food primary licenses and are allowed for any restaurant. But pubs, which is liquor primary, so that focuses more on the drinking than on the eating, those are only site specifically allowed for in the district.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, I really appreciate the input. These were just questions that I was anticipating might come from the public. Thank you.
All right. We have a motion on the floor. Any other discussion? I'm just going to say, personally, I think this is exciting to see something firming up, and I think as those details become more public, it'll drive a lot of interest and attention to that space, and probably drive a lot of vibrance into that corner. So, with that, I will call a question. All those in favor? Any opposed?
Yes.
All right. It passes. No one opposed. Thank you very much for coming here tonight. That is it. That covenant is essentially approved. Yeah, there's no more steps on that one for us, so we're good to go. Thank you very much. Thank you for sitting through the meeting. Nice to see you here. We have one last piece of business, which is just some new business. It's an amended agenda. This is just a slight change. At the UBCM meeting coming up, there is an AGM for the Municipal Insurance Association. Councillor Patterson is unable to attend, as is alternate Councillor Watson, and so I am able to go to that meeting. So this is just gives a direction for me to attend.
I'll move the recommendation that Mayor Murdoch be appointed second alternate voting delegate to the Municipal Insurance Association of BC for the 2023 annual general meeting.
Second.
Any discussion? All those, go ahead, Councillor Patterson.
The only comment is that it must be received by their association leader by Thursday. So staff's paying, they're not paying attention. It's got to go in by Thursday. This copy of the resolution must be received by MIA by Thursday. Thank you.
Staff are on it. Perfect. Yeah, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed? I'll do my best to represent. And we just need a motion to be moved, seconded. Did I see a seconder for adjournment? There we go. All those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed? Thank you very much,
Yes.
Councillor Green, Councillor Appleton, for joining us.
And I'm
remotely.
so sorry about all the glitches tonight. Thank you for bearing with me, everybody.
And vice versa. Thank you for your persistence and sticking with us. That was great. We will see you all in 2 weeks, because next week is taken up by UBCM. Take care. Thanks
Enjoy
again for coming in
UBCM,
today.
everybody.
All right,
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye, Andrew.